Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Naruto is adopted by Minato's sister and follow her? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Okidoki33 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. You have to do it in secret? Naruko asked, surprised. Minato scratched the back of his head with a goofy grin on his face and a blush of embarrassment over his face. Yeah, complications with the seal Kushina's got, that's all. Naruko sighed in relief. Oh, I thought it was something a little more serious. Hey, this seal is serious, Minato said with a little laugh, trying to ease the anxiety, not just in Naruko, but in himself as well. Well, I know that. I was thinking that since you're the Hokage and all, that might mean that all this secrecy meant that they were afraid that you'd get attacked. Like, there was an assassination attempt on the baby or something. Great Naruko, Minato thought. I didn't think of that until you brought it up. Now I have more to worry about. Minato, the fourth Hokage, was about to become a father. Kushina, his wife, was about to give birth to their first child, and that first child would also be Naruko's first godchild. Naruko was Minato's little sister, but just because she was his little sister didn't mean that she was a child. She was only younger than him by 2 years. I'm pretty sure no ninja keeps track of his target's childbirths, Minato joked, trying to ease the added anxiety he felt from her previous statement. Naruko looked at her old brother and squeezed his face into her hand playfully. Well, excuse me, Mr. Hokage. It's not my fault that I don't know what ninjas know. Let go of my face, you witch! Minato cried, playfully pretending to be in pain and trying to pry his face from her hand. This earned a laugh from both of them. Despite all of the extra worries Naruko gave him about the birth of his child and how it could possibly take a turn for the worst, Minato was glad to have talked to her before departing. She could always find a way to put a smile on his face or make a laugh come out of his mouth. The same could be said for Naruko. Despite their chemistry, the two held two totally different lifestyles. While Minato aspired to be a ninja growing up, Naruko had settled for the quieter life of an average person. While it was Minato's dream to become Hokage and bring peace to the world in a big way, and fight for peace as a shinobi warrior, Naruko had dreamed of a simple life, finding her Prince Charming and bringing peace one small step at a time, with small kind acts. If you were to compare them from their youth to now, you would say that they had fulfilled their dreams somewhat. Minato was literally fourth Hokage, one of the greatest titles a shinobi could ever dream of having, and Naruko had blossomed into a woman that had stolen the hearts of many men, and was popular among the women of the village for her kind and gentle spirit. This arrangement had worked well for them. After a mission, Minato would come home and be greeted with the dinner Naruko had made, waiting for him to eat to his stomach's delight, and with Naruko at home, he didn't have to worry about paying the bills and just went on living his ninja life. And with Minato being one of the best ninjas in the village, and the slightly overprotective big brother he was, no man dared to hurt Naruko in any way. After they had stopped laughing, Naruko asked, So, have you decided on a name yet? Minato nodded. We'll be naming him Naruto. Naruko smirked. How do you know it's a boy already? I may not be a ninja, but I at least know none of you can predict the future. Minato shrugged. I don't know. A gut feeling I have. Naruko shook her head with a laugh. Okay, fine, but why are you naming him Naruto? Minato grinned. We decided to name him after you. Naruko's eyes grew in surprise. Seriously? Minato nodded. What's the problem? If you both have similar names, then he's more inclined to be interested in what you're doing, and if he's interested in knowing about what you're doing, then he'll follow you around, and if he follows you around, your personality would spread onto him and he'd be a good boy. I'd be raising the kid without raising a finger. After the explanation, he had a smug grin on his face. Naruko almost screamed. Seriously? Minato laughed. Of course not. But still, you've been a big part of my life and a good friend to Kushina, even while she was pregnant and her hormones went wild. But in all seriousness, Minato quickly added as Naruko gave him a displeased look, we really did want to name our child after someone we admired, and there's no one else I can think about except you, sis. Naruko looked at her brother in shock, and then cast her glance to the floor in embarrassment, even blushing a little bit. You too, bro. With that statement, Minato also felt his head look down in embarrassment. They may have had a close relationship, but they still seldom ever said anything so sentimental to each other. Hey, Minato began, trying to break the awkwardness between them a little bit. I have your word, right? That if anything happens to me and Kushina that you would take care of him, right? Naruko looked at him and nodded with a big smile on her face. You bet. Minato smiled, but then looked down at the floor again and asked, Naruko, do you think I'll be a good father? Naruko had a gentle smile on her lips. You've taken care of me all these years, right? How hard could it be to do it again? And besides, she sat down next to Minato and looked up at his face. You have Kushina and me to help you out this time. Minato smiled. I'm really too lucky to have you two in my life. Naruko looked down in embarrassment once again. Then you'd better treasure it, or else we'll clobber you in your sleep. She joked. Minato laughed a little. She was right. He wasn't alone on this. He looked out the window. I should probably get going right now, he said. Naruko took her brother's hands into hers. Then go. Naruko was in their house right now. It had been a while since Minato had left to go with Kushina to give birth to their child. She wondered what was taking him so long to give her the news. Didn't it happen yet? And if it did, why didn't Minato notify her yet? You'd think a ninja nicknamed the Yellow Flash would be able to tell her the news in a blink of an eye. Suddenly, she heard a tremendous boom coming from outside. As she looked out the window, she screamed. Outside, she saw a gigantic fox with 9 tails and orange fur, practically destroying the forest of the Hidden Leaf Village. For some reason, she couldn't stop staring at the bloodthirsty eyes of the 9-tailed fox. She was lost in them, frozen in fear. She was awakened from her trance by an urgent knock on the door. She ran toward it and opened it, and saw a fellow shinobi. Naruko, we need you to evacuate right now. What's going on? How did this happen? Naruko asked, panic apparent in her voice. We can't say right now. Right now, the safety of the villagers is the most important thing. Please, you need to evacuate right now. The shinobi reached out his hand, imploring that she take it. Naruko took one more look out the window and after a brief moment of hesitation, nodded and took the shinobi's hand. Minato, Naruko thought. Please be okay. Moments ago. So, Minato thought. That masked man wants to release the 9-tailed fox, destroy the hidden leaf, and had the nerve to attack my wife and son? Minato's eyes grew sharper. No way am I gonna let him get his way. I'll protect the people I treasure. As Naruko was waiting at the evacuation site, she saw a familiar face in the distance. Kakashi! She cried, waving her arms to signal where she was. Kakashi looked at her and slowly walked towards her, with a look of sadness on his face. Naruko, not wanting to wait any longer, ran towards him, and they met halfway. Kakashi, what happened? Naruko asked. Kakashi shook his head. I don't know, he answered. One moment it was an ordinary day, the next, that giant fox came out of nowhere and attacked the village. Naruko looked at his distraught face and asked, Why are you here? The old ninja wanted the younger generation of ninjas to be evacuated. I guess they thought that if all of them died, at least the village would have its next generation to protect it. Naruko nodded in understanding, and as she looked around, saw many other ninjas close to Kakashi's age. As she returned her attention to Kakashi, she was startled to find Kakashi close to tears. Kakashi, she asked in a gentle voice. What's wrong? Kakashi was wiping his eyes with his arm. In bitter sniffles he answered. First Obito then Rin, am I going to lose Minato-sensei too? Naruko's eyes softened as she enveloped Kakashi in a gentle and reassuring hug. Don't worry, Minato will be alright. He's the 4th Hokage after all. Yeah, but the situation it's just so hopeless. Don't say that, Naruko interrupted. She lowered herself so that she and Kakashi were face to face. Never lose hope, Kakashi. I believe if you have hope then anything can happen. Kakashi gasped. There was such determination in Naruko's eyes. After staring at her for a while, Kakashi's expression relaxed, and he nodded. Naruko smiled. That's right, she told herself. As long as you have hope, nothing can stop you. Isn't that right, Minato? After a long time, Naruko saw the third Hokage and a large group of ninja walk slowly toward the evacuation site. She didn't see Minato with them. With fear sprouting in her, she ran towards the third Hokage, who had something in his arms. "Third!" Naruko cried. The third Hokage raised his hand to stop her, and gave her what he was holding. Naruko looked at what she had been given and gasped. There, in her arms, was a baby boy, with blonde hair and whisker marks on his face, just like her. He had cuddled up in her arms and was sleeping peacefully. Naruko looked at the third Hokage and asked, "Who is this?" The third Hokage sighed and answered, "Your godchild." Naruko gasped, and after a while, realization rose from within her. "Wait." Her voice was faltering. "Does that mean?" "Yes, Naruko," the third Hokage said sadly. "Minato and Kushina are both dead." Naruko was trying to fight back tears. "This is Naruto?" "Yes." Naruko looked at the baby and kissed his forehead, and after caressing his face, looked back at the third Hokage and asked, "What happened?" It seemed like she was asking this question a lot today. The third Hokage let out an exasperated sigh. "A man in a mask ambushed us. His target was the nine-tailed fox. He succeeded at releasing it and Minato fought hard. In the end, all he could do was seal the nine-tailed fox into the baby you see before you." "Wait a minute." Naruko and the third Hokage, startled, looked to the side, to see a villager had listened in on the conversation. "Are you telling me that that demon is in the kid right now?" he screamed, obviously frightened and paranoid after today's ordeal. "Well, yes," the third Hokage began. "But you see, if the demon is inside that kid, then we should kill him." The previous scream from that villager had directed everyone's attention to the scene, and many others were joining the man's side. "Yeah, who knows when the demon will come out again? Let's kill it while we have the chance." "What are you waiting for, third Hokage? Kill it. That thing needs to die. Are we just going to let it live and risk another attack on the village? My husband died fighting that thing. Let's avenge everyone's deaths." "Yeah, Naruko. That thing killed the fourth and his wife, right? Don't you want to avenge their deaths?" "No," Naruko began. "You don't understand. We don't need to understand. We know enough to know what we should do." "Silence!" the third Hokage commanded. Everyone got quiet. "We will not kill the boy. The demon may be inside him, but he's still him. I will let him live his life." There was grumbling among the people. "The third Hokage and Naruko are too nice. Can't they see that no matter what it looks like, the child is still a demon and a threat?" Naruko felt a hand rest firmly, but reassuringly on her shoulder. She looked behind her to see the third Hokage looking at her. "Naruko," he said, "we might have to talk about this in private." He made a hand sign, and the next thing Naruko knew, she was teleported to the Hokage's office. The third sat down in the chair that was previously his. He stretched a little bit and sighed. "Now then, we need to know what to do with the child. With the fourth dead and no current replacement available at the moment, it's to be expected that I would be re-elected as Hokage. If that does happen, then I'll be too busy to raise the child on my own. Now what should we do with the child? Obviously the village will ostracize him, and if given the chance, they might kill him as well. And after fighting the nine-tailed fox, I doubt that they'll be too willing to raise the boy as one of their own. And if you take care of him, who knows what'll happen to you, a regular person. Obviously if the village decides to take an aggressive approach against the boy, you won't be able to stop them, and they might kill you too." He sighed again. What a predicament. Naruko looked at the baby in her arms. Then she looked up at the third, with determination in her eyes. "It should be obvious, right?" she said. "I'll take care of him, I'll raise him." She held the boy close. "After all, we are family, aren't we?" "But Naruko, the consequences of having him are too great." "That doesn't matter," Naruko said. "Naruto is family now, and I treasure my family, and I'll make sure nothing happens to him." While she was saying this, she was looking at Naruto's sleeping face the entire time. The third grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." Naruko continued to look at Naruto, and said with a grin, "Hope can make anything possible. Are you sure there's nothing I can do to help?" Naruko smiled. "No, I'm sure." She then showed her visitor a concerned look. "In all honesty, I feel that I should be asking you that. Didn't you leave the village in order to find a friend of yours? Jiraiya let out an exasperated sigh. Well, yeah, but it hasn't been easy. Haven't found a single clue yet. I kind of doubt you can help me anyway. No one knows my friend better than me, right? Jiraiya chuckled. He had heard fairly quickly that his apprentice had been killed in battle with the nine-tailed fox, and rushed to the village in order to help out as much as he could. He may have been trailing Orochimaru and the Akatsuki, but he always found time to spend time with his apprentice, and attending Minato's funeral was no exception. It had been an hour since the funeral, and since then, he and Naruko had had some time to catch up, and during that time, Naruko had explained the situation with Naruto. The boy was going to have it pretty rough, and if things get crazy enough, Naruko may have a hard time too. He couldn't stay though, so before he left, he had asked if Naruko needed help with anything, but Naruko declined. By the way, Jiraiya asked, where is the little tyke anyway? He had a smirk on his face. You didn't lose him already, did you, Naruko? Naruko pouted. No, I haven't. She let out an exasperated sigh of her own. The third asked if he could have him for the day. The council's not going to take the issue of a demon inside a child lightly, and from what he told me, some have really considered the option of killing the poor thing. She shuddered at the thought of a baby being sentenced to death. The third thinks that bringing Naruto in and letting the council see him for themselves will help convince them to keep Naruto alive, and possibly make some laws to protect the both of us from the villagers killing him themselves. Jiraiya thought for a moment. Using a child's innocence to influence the council's decision. Jiraiya laughed at that. That old geezer's still got some tricks up his sleeve. Still, kind of shrewd, even for the old man. Naruko had a smile on her face. I guess that shows us how much this means to him. Jiraiya shrugged. Yeah, I guess I can understand that. If I were in his shoes, I'd probably use every dirty trick in the book to keep that kid alive. Wouldn't want a kid's death sentence on my conscience. Jiraiya had a smug grin on his face, approached Naruko and slowly put his arm around her shoulder and brought her close. Just like I can't leave in good conscience a beautiful woman who's had no experience raising a kid by herself without helping her out first. Naruko looked at the Jiraiya with a sickening look and stomped on his foot. She may have been considered a nice person, but even she wouldn't allow herself to be a victim of Jiraiya's perverted flirting. Jiraiya yelped in pain and held his injured foot. Geez, woman! I swear, if you hadn't chosen a normal life for yourself, you would have made one heck of a ninja. Naruko had a fake smile on her face now. And no matter what life you would have chosen for yourself, you'd still be a big, fat pervert. Jiraiya held up his hands in protest. Hey, but you have to admit, I'd also be great either way, right? Naruko crossed her arms angrily. Actually, without your jutsus, you're actually pretty lame. Jiraiya held his hand above the place his heart would be and pretended to be in mock pain. Ah, a beautiful woman telling a man he's lame. He sighed dramatically. There's nothing more painful. Naruko groaned and shook her head. Why are you still here? Jiraiya could sense that he had overstayed his visit. All right, already. I'll leave. He was about to jump out the window before he stopped himself and asked again, in a serious and concerned voice. But seriously, are you going to be all right? Naruko smiled a reassuring smile at Jiraiya and gave him an answer with just as much seriousness. Yeah, I'll manage. Besides, I'll have the old geezer to help me. Jiraiya smiled at her. His apprentice's sister wasn't a ninja, but she was still one heck of a strong woman. He was about to leave before he stopped himself again and said, Oh, I almost forgot. He rummaged through his bag, looking for something. Finally, he found what he was looking for and his face lit up. Aha! He took out what appeared to be a small yellow book. Found it! Naruko looked at the book curiously. What is it? Jiraiya held the book close and proudly smiled. This is my latest book. And I believe it's my greatest masterpiece, if I do say so myself. Here. He motioned for Naruko to grab the book out of his hand. Naruko took it and asked, Wait, you're giving this to me? Jiraiya nodded. Yep. My last book failed to be a bestseller, but this one will. I can just feel it. Jiraiya watched Naruko eagerly, as if he expected her to start reading it this very moment. Naruko looked at the book. Make out paradise? She smiled to herself. Jiraiya's last book was the tale of the utterly gutsy shinobi, which was a story about a hero vowing to break the world's curse. No doubt this one wasn't going to be any different. Despite Naruko being angry at all of Jiraiya's perverted shenanigans, she knew that deep down Jiraiya was a fierce believer in peace. She looked at Jiraiya with an amused look on her face. "Funny, I actually liked your last book." Jiraiya waved off her compliment. You probably don't even remember what it was about." "Of course I do. It's about this character named Naruto and—" She stopped herself. "Wait," she thought. "The hero's name was Naruto too?" Jiraiya looked at her shocked expression and smiled to himself proudly. "Yep, Minato liked my book so much that he decided to name his unborn child after my main character. He even said that if anything happened to the little guy, I would be his godfather. Of course, with me traveling all the time, I guess the kid's better off staying with you." Naruko shook her head. "But Minato said that he named Naruto after me. He said that he wanted to name it after someone he and Kushina both admired and that if anything happened to them, I would be Naruto's godmother and take care of him." Jiraiya shook his head in protest. "No way. You must have heard him wrong or something. He totally said those things about MY book, and MY main character, and MY position as part of the family." He laughed to himself. "I was almost about to decline too. I mean, come on. My kind of work can be pretty dangerous from time to time. I never would have had any time to raise a kid." But that last thing he said, he wiped an imaginary tear of happiness away, really touched me. I couldn't say no after that. Naruko stared at Jiraiya in shock. "Wait, you were about to decline the title of godfather?" Jiraiya nodded. "That's so strange." "Me too. When Minato asked me if I could be Naruto's godmother, I was on the fence about it. I mean, he told me lots of times before that he wanted his kid to be a ninja, so what good would it have been for him to be stuck with me, a normal person? But when he said all those nice things about me, I couldn't say no." "So wait, that means—" They both looked at each other for a moment before the cruel realization hit them. They both screamed. "He suckered us!" Naruko was angrily walking through the forest. After Jiraiya and herself realized what her brother had done to them, they both angrily said their goodbyes and left. Jiraiya, no doubt, angrily went back on his mission, while Naruko angrily walked through the forest to let out some steam. Her brother may have just died recently, but to succor two people that cared about him, that just felt wrong. She continued walking until she saw a figure in the distance. Curiosity got the best of her, and she walked toward the figure. When she was close enough to the figure, she noticed that it was someone she knew, looking at something. "Kakashi!" she cried, waving towards the young shinobi. Kakashi turned around and returned her wave with a small wave of his own. Naruko slowly walked to where Kakashi was and looked at what Kakashi was looking at. It was the memorial stone. The memorial stone had all the names of all the shinobi who had been killed in action, and Kakashi's friend, Obito, had his name there. From what Minato told her, Kakashi spent much of his free time here. Naruko approached the stone and paid her respects to the fallen, and softly asked Kakashi, "What are you doing here?" Kakashi continued looking at the stone and asked, "Why do you ask?" Naruko shrugged. "Minato's funeral was only a while ago. I thought since we were already at the cemetery, you'd take the chance to visit Obito and Rin's graves too." Kakashi could at least understand that logic. "I always visit their graves and the memorial stone. I don't know why, but it just seems right." Naruko looked at Kakashi and said, "Minato told me you spend most of your free time here." Kakashi continued to look at the stone. "Yeah. Why?" Kakashi didn't answer, and Naruko didn't pry. For a few minutes they stared at the memorial stone, until finally Kakashi asked, "How do you do it?" Naruko looked at Kakashi questionably. Kakashi was still looking at the stone. "Your brother just died recently. How can you recover from that so quickly?" Naruko thought for a moment, and answered, "I guess it's because no matter how hard I try, he won't be coming back. Besides," she had a small smile on her face, "I have someone that depends on me right now. I have to stay strong for him at least." She looked at Kakashi. "And you have to stay strong too." Kakashi's fists were clenched. "For who exactly?" His voice was faltering now. "My parents are dead. My friends are dead. My teacher is dead. Everyone precious to me has been taken away from me. How can I be strong when I have nothing else to be strong for? He looked at Naruko. All I ever did was hope that things would get better, but they haven't. After my parents died, I thought I could at least be a great ninja, but then Obito showed me just how weak I really was. After Obito died, I wanted to protect Rin, but I couldn't. After I promised myself that I would never let any more of my friends die, Minato died, and there wasn't a single thing I could do about it. Tears were starting to form in his eyes. I'm sick of this. All this hope is just false hope that keeps plunging me into a greater despair. Kakashi was starting to lose it. Naruko wrapped her arms around Kakashi and gave him a firm hug. It's alright, she whispered. Let it all out, it's okay. And for a few minutes, Kakashi just cried. Naruko stroked his back comfortingly, waiting patiently for him to get his bearings. When Kakashi finally calmed down, he looked up at Naruko and asked with pleading eyes, What exactly am I supposed to fight for now? Naruko ruffled Kakashi's hair a little bit and answered, First of all, stop thinking like that. What would Minato, Obito and Rin say if they saw you like this? After a little while, Kakashi realized that she wanted him to answer her question. They'd probably tell me I was an idiot, and that I shouldn't feel so bad about it. He let out a bitter laugh. Naruko nodded. Exactly. I may have not known all of you as much as my brother did, but even I could tell that you were all good friends. And I doubt good friends let their friends plunge themselves into despair. She gave Kakashi a small smile. Secondly, you need to keep on living. I know you think that you have nothing else to live for, but that's not true. You're living for Obito, Rin and now Minato too. They gave you the gift of life. Treasure the life that they gave you. Live on for them because now, you are their new hope. Kakashi looked at Naruko for a moment, then at the ground, then at the memorial stone. I'm sorry, he said. But I don't think I'll ever stop coming here. Naruko gave a soft giggle. I didn't expect you to turn a complete 180. But maybe instead of feeling sorry for yourself all the time, maybe you can at least have a hobby to keep your mind off of it? Kakashi looked at her again. Like what? Naruko thought for a moment, and then realized that she still had Jiraiya's book with her. Her light bulb lit up. How about, she took out the book and presented it in front of Kakashi's face. Reading? Kakashi looked at the book with wide eyes for a moment. Make Out Paradise? Never heard of it before. Well, from what I can tell, it just came out, and the author is a friend of mine and he gave me a free copy, but I think it's better off in your hands than mine. She offered the book to Kakashi. I'll be taking care of a baby soon. Something tells me I won't have any time to read, with a baby keeping me busy and all. Kakashi hesitated for a moment before taking the book. He looked at it for a moment and asked, What is it about? Naruko shrugged. I don't know. I haven't even looked at it yet. But if I know the author, then it's probably about a hero that never gives up. A hero who wants to turn the world away from despair and towards paradise. Plus I think he finds his true love. She giggled. Kakashi set the book under his arm and said, Thank you. Naruko smiled. You're very welcome. She turned to walk back home. Kakashi cried, Hey, Naruko? She turned around. What? Is it true what they say, that you're going to take care of the demon child? Naruko took a moment to think about her answer. Yeah. She waited a moment to see what Kakashi would do next. When he didn't say anything, Naruko asked, Do you believe that he's the demon too? Kakashi shook his head, waved off the statement, and said with his usual indifferent disposition, Are you kidding? Minato sacrificed himself to turn a giant, demonic fox into a little kid. There's no such jutsu. And besides, that's just plain silly. Why would anyone do that? Naruko smiled at him. Thank you, she cried. Kakashi turned around and started walking toward the opposite direction and waved back. Yeah, well, I guess you can consider us even now. Naruko laughed and continued walking back home. When Kakashi got home, he looked at the book Naruko had given him. He shrugged to himself. Might as well. And he started to read. Kakashi had barely read 2 pages, but he was totally hooked. This book is amazing. What do you mean you still need him? Naruko asked, surprised. For a whole week, the only time I've ever spent with Naruto is at night, when he goes to sleep. Not counting the times when he wakes me up in the middle of the night for one reason or another, I haven't even spent an hour with him. And if we're going to live together, we have to be acquainted with each other. She looked at Naruto, who was currently in her arms right now. Isn't that right, Naruto? She gushed playfully. Oh! She cried, as Naruto grabbed some of her hair, pulled it down, and put it in his mouth. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to let her hair down, especially near the baby. Naruko was trying to get her hair loose from Naruto's mouth. No, Naruto! Very bad! When she finally got it loose, she looked at Naruto and pouted. Now I know it's my fault for letting my hair down today, but you can't do that in the future, young man. Not to a boy, and especially not to a girl, alright? She scolded lightly, wagging her finger lightly in front of his little face. Of course, Naruto didn't understand what was happening, and laughed, apparently thinking that he had done something good. The third chuckled at the scene before him. I'm sorry that my needing the child is preventing you from experiencing more than just hair pulling and sleepless nights, but laws aren't made in a day, you know, and there are more laws that we need to make than you realize. Naruko stopped caressing her scalp and asked, Like what? The third thought for a moment, before answering. Well, there are hospital laws, educational laws, issues about whether we should consider Naruto a citizen of the village or not. Really? You have to discuss about that too? The third nodded. Remember, there's a lot of controversy about letting the child live to begin with, so if they can't kill Naruto, then they'll just try to deprive him of any rights and hope that it'll kill him naturally. Naruko cringed at the thought. Who knew political figures were so devious? She looked at Naruto and kissed him on his little forehead, as if attempting to make him forget what he had just heard. The third rubbed his temples and rolled his eyes. You have no idea, he muttered. He extended his arms and asked, May I have him now? Oh, sorry. Naruko gently put Naruto in the third's arms and whispered softly, We'll see each other again, okay, Naruto? She grabbed both of Naruto's little hands and kissed them both playfully, before the third took Naruto away. Before the third was too far away, he said over his shoulder, I don't know if you've done this yet or not, the third began. But maybe you should spend the time you don't have with Naruto preparing yourself to raise Naruto. The third scratched his chin. Last time I checked, you didn't make your apartment baby-friendly yet, have you? Naruko's eyes grew wide and she laughed weakly. Yeah, I was just getting to that, heh. She then started running to the nearest baby shop. The third Hokage shook his head. She means well and all. He looked at Naruto, who was playing with his hat. But is she really ready for this type of challenge? I'm sorry, Naruko, but I can't in good conscience let you buy these. Why not? Naruko asked. Because all these baby supplies will help that little demon grow, and when he grows up, he's going to wreak havoc on the village again when we least expect it. And when that happens, I don't want anybody pointing fingers at me for contributing to the demon's growth. I have a family to take care of. I'm not going to endanger my family because of the demon's attack, or the danger of being involved with it, the owner of the shop said. By the looks of it, the owner of the shop wasn't going to listen to reason. Naruko frowned and sighed. She hated to do this, but when push comes to shove, she can play hardball if she needed to. Naruko lowered her head, drawing circles on the counter with her finger, leaned close to the store owner's face, and whispered softly. I understand, but can you at least make an exception? You can deliver it at night when everyone's asleep or something. The store owner shook his head. No way. I'm not going to risk it. Naruko shrugged. Fine then. I'll just stay then. What? Naruko nodded. You know, a lot of people think that I've been possessed by the demon, that the only reason I'm taking care of the child is because the demon is controlling me, making me do something that no one in their right mind would do. Because of that, a lot of people have started to avoid me. Whenever I go into a room, most people leave it, just because I'm there. I guess they're afraid that they're going to be possessed too. Like possession is a disease or something. The store owner stepped back in fear. Are you threatening me? Naruko shook her head. If I am, I'm sorry, but the way I see it, I'm stating the facts and how this isn't beneficial for either of us. If I just leave today, I'll just come back tomorrow, and I just keep coming back until you sell me the things I want. Eventually, that's going to give your store a bad reputation. She crossed her arms, her voice being calm and steady. And if I stay here, then no one will come into this store, just because I'm in it. If no one wants to go into your store, and you're not going to sell me anything, then eventually, this business of yours will fall apart, and last time I checked, you put a lot of pride into this business, right? The store owner glared at her. Why you? Naruko didn't like being glared at, but at this point, she just have to make do. Please reconsider, sir. She bowed, showing him her respects. The store owner hesitated, before finally shouting, Yeah, right. I'd rather lose my pride and joy than die or be ostracized. He pointed towards the store's entrance. Now get out of my dash. Hold it right there. Naruko and the store owner looked to their left, to see the store owner's wife, who had crossed her arms and was glaring at her husband. She walked up to her husband and yanked his ear. Give the girl what she wants, you stupid old fool! The store owner, cringing at the pain inflicted on his ear, yelled, But lady, you don't understand. The wife put her hands on her husband's face, squeezed his face in her hands, and forced him to look at her in the eye, a menacing aura surrounding her. You said you had a family to take care of, right? Well, how are you going to take care of your family when you don't even have enough money for groceries this week? You want us to starve to death or something? The store owner was trying to break out of his wife's grip. No, that's not it at all. Then what are you standing around here for? Give the girl what she wants and be done with it. Why, yes, ma'am. He was about to do just that, before his wife grabbed his collar and yelled, Apologize to your customer first. The store owner hesitated for a moment, before finally bowing and saying, I'm sorry, Naruko. Naruko didn't really know how to respond to the scene she had just witnessed, but she raised her hands in protest, saying, Oh, don't worry about it. I completely understand. She bowed to them herself. If anything, I'm sorry that I was such a bother. The store owner seemed to calm down after that. He sold Naruko the things she wanted, she thanked him, and was about to leave, before the store owner's wife yelled, Take care of that kid! Ya hear? She grumbled before adding, And don't you think that I think that that kid isn't the demon? Let's just say I have a soft spot for fellow mothers. Ya hear? Naruko looked at the store owner's wife in shock before smiling, nodding and saying, Yes, ma'am. As Naruko left the store and was walking back home, she looked at her shopping bag and thought for a moment. Now that I think about it, when Minato was still alive, he was the one that brought in all the money, with missions and stuff like that. Now that he's dead, eventually I'm going to run out of money if I keep spending it like this. Naruko cringed. Eventually I'm going to have to find a job. How am I going to do that? Despite what others may have thought based on her discussion with the store shop owner, Naruko was very much telling the truth. Many people thought she really was possessed, and they really did leave the room whenever she entered. What are the chances of those same people hiring her for a job? It was already bad enough that she was inexperienced, but now that she thought about it, the situation was much worse than she thought. What am I gonna do? She wailed. Just then, she bumped into two familiar faces. Naruko, hey, how's it going? Izumo. Kotetsu. She hugged the two of them and said, I'm doing fine. Thank you. Well, looks like someone's having a good day today, Kotetsu remarked, a smirk on his face. What? Naruko asked. Why? Let's just say that Kotetsu wants the last 6 hours of his life back, Izumo said. Heck yeah, I want the last 6 hours of my life back, Kotetsu yelled to his partner. Not even a moment of peace with that little brat. Kotetsu, watch what you say. Izumo looked at Naruko. Forgive my friend here. He's got some issues with a certain someone today. You'd have issues too if you had to deal with that little brat for 6 hours straight, Izumo cried. Am I missing something here? Naruko asked, laughing. Izumo chuckled. Kotetsu had to sub in for one of the teachers in the ninja academy, and let's just say that one of the students there was a bit of a thorn in Kotetsu's side. You're pushing it, Kotetsu grumbled under his breath. What happened to the teacher? Naruko asked. Kotetsu and Izumo looked at each other, before Izumo answered gravely. He died fighting the nine-tailed fox. Naruko's expression softened. Oh. The three just stared at the floor for a moment before Kotetsu tried to lighten the mood. Well, at least I only had to sub in for a day, you know? He stretched his arms out and yawned. And you have to admit, he asked, addressing Izumo. I'm not the only one who hates that kid. Izumo sighed, but nodded. Yeah, I guess you're right. He looked at Naruko, who was looking at the two questionably. He decided to explain the situation to her. That class that Kotetsu subbed for has already been given 7 subs before him. The academy is trying to find someone who is willing to take on the teacher role full-time, but the kid Kotetsu keeps talking about has been driving everyone crazy, so no one really wants to take on the job. Izumo shook his head. Disgraceful. It shouldn't matter if one kid is too out of hand. Leading the next generation of ninja is too important of a job to let one annoying kid get in the way. You're always talking about things that you've never actually experienced yourself, Kotetsu muttered. It doesn't make me wrong. Actually, it makes you totally wrong. As the two argued, Naruko started thinking. So the Ninja Academy needed a teacher, huh? So the class still doesn't have a teacher, right? Naruko asked. Kotetsu looked at her, a surprised look on his face. Yeah? Why? Naruko hesitated before asking. Is it okay that I sub for the class? The two ninja looked at each other. But you're not a shinobi, Kotetsu stated. Yeah, but one day of subbing shouldn't do too much damage, right? Izumo thought for a moment. Yes, and you're not exactly clueless about how to be a shinobi either, being the 4th Hokage's sister and all. Naruko nodded. Right. I can at least teach them basic coordination, right? That could really help on the taijutsu department, right? Kotetsu smirked. She's not exactly wrong. And it wouldn't be so bad to make them do other exercises other than running laps and regular workouts, right? Izumo looked at both of them for a moment. Kotetsu looked really eager and excited, but that was obviously because he didn't want to be stuck subbing again, and Naruko looked just as eager and excited, but for what reason? He looked at her shopping bag, and put a little bit more than 2 and 2 together. You just want to get paid, don't you, Naruko? Naruko cringed, and after Kotetsu saw her cringed too. He's not right, Naruko? Naruko laughed weakly. Well, she fiddled with her fingers a little and looked away. He's not exactly wrong either. The two shinobi cringed. Well, I've heard of worse reasons to sub for a ninja class, Kotetsu said. Yeah, but none were ever so shallow, Izumo replied. Okay, Naruko. Take a deep breath. This'll be simple. All we're going to do today is do some exercises and the regular assigned schedule. Naruko took a deep breath. She could hear the students talking amongst themselves in the classroom, which only made her more and more nervous by the second. She was told the moment she got there that the academy had finally found someone who would be willing to teach full-time and that he would start tomorrow, and although that took off some of the pressure for today, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Oh well, she thought. Might as well get this over with. No hesitation. She reached for the door and opened it. A water balloon hit her square in the face. Ha 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 ha! Did you guys see that? That was hilarious! The boy who had thrown the said water balloon had brown hair and a scar across his nose. Iruka! That's kind of mean, isn't it? I mean, she's only subbing for the day, a silver-haired boy said, running up to Iruka. Ah, come on, Mizuki! You have to admit, that was classic. Mizuki frowned, turned to a drenched Naruko, and bowed, saying, I'm sorry that you were unfortunate enough to be a victim of one of Iruka's pranks. He raised his head and glanced at Iruka through the corner of his eye. Iruka was never very good at making friends. Was it Naruko's imagination, or did she see a sneer appear on Mizuki's face? Don't take it too personally, Iruka, but you aren't. Iruka, for a split second, looked hurt by this statement, but quickly put a smile on his face, scratching the back of his head, laughing. Are you kidding, Mizuki? You're one of my friends, aren't you? Mizuki chuckled. I guess. But having only one friend is nothing to brag about either. A girl from her desk gasped. You're Naruko Namikaze. Naruko, while wringing her hair and clothes, smiled and said, Yeah, that's me. The students gasped. Mizuki and Iruka stepped back a little and some of the students were whispering amongst each other. My mom said that she was taking care of the demon child. I've heard rumors that she was possessed or something. Is she going to try and possess us too? Idiot! Possession isn't like a disease or something, right? I hear that thing's going to destroy the village again. Naruko took a hairband out of her pocket and put her hair into a single ponytail. After that, she clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. All right, settle down," she cried. "Get back to your seats." She turned to Iruka and Mizuki. "You two. Go on." As the two got to their seats, Naruko put her hands on her hips and said, "Look. I know that the demon attacking the village was scary, and I know that many of you have probably been victims of the demon's attack, but me personally? I don't believe that the child is the demon itself." Naruko sighed. "Then again, I digress. You can believe anything you want to believe, and I'll believe anything I want to believe. That's your right, and frankly, I can't really do anything about it anyway. I gave you all my 2 cents, and that's good enough for me." She wagged her finger at them. "But you all believing I'm possessed, that's where I draw the line. I'll have you all know that I feel just fine. I always know where I'm going, and I always know why I'm going there. And besides," she giggled, "if I were possessed, I'd be trying to eat all of your brains out of something. I'll stick to ramen and junk food, thank you very much." The students seemed to calm down after that. Good, Naruko thought. They've all calmed down. Maybe this won't be so bad after all. Naruko clapped her hands. "All right. I'm going to be subbing for your class today." "But wait a minute," a student shouted. "You aren't a ninja." "Yeah, but she's the 4th Hokage's sister," a girl said. "Yeah," a boy cried, starting to get excited. "Maybe the 4th Hokage taught her everything he knows, and maybe she's like a secret ninja or something." "Aren't secret ninjas illegal ninjas?" "Who cares? We're going to learn how to walk at lightning fast speeds. This is gonna rock." Naruko laughed weakly. "Actually, I don't really know how to do any of the ninjutsu my brother does. In all honesty, I'd have a better chance learning from you than you from me." Come on." "Lame." "Now wait just a second," Naruko said, raising her hands in protest. "I may not know anything about genjutsu or ninjutsu, but I can at least help you all with your taijutsu." A girl raised her hand and said, Excuse me, but my mom said that you wouldn't even hurt a fly." "I hurt some flies," Naruko said weakly. She shook her head, trying to regain her composure and her control over the class. "Besides, there's more to taijutsu than just kicks and punches. There's also coordination, reflexes, stuff like that." "And how would you know any of that stuff, huh?" "Yeah," Iruka laughed. "If you knew anything about reflexes and coordination, then you would have been able to dodge my water balloon from before, right?" He laughed some more. Naruko scratched her head. "You're right about that. But at the very least, I know what to work on and what not to do. Let me remind you all that my brother was the 4th Hokage, and I had front row seats when it came to watching him train. Sometimes he was pretty impressive, and sometimes he wasn't so impressive." She wagged her finger and winked. "I can tell you guys what my brother had trouble with, and help make sure it doesn't give you guys the same amount of trouble." "Whoa! Seriously?" "Well, I can certainly try, can I?" Naruko said, smiling. "Now why don't we go outside and get started already?" She started walking towards the door, before she stopped herself and added, "Before we go, however, everyone has to pick a partner except you, Mizuki. I've got something special for you." "Really?" Mizuki asked eagerly. To be able to show his stuff in front of the 4th Hokage's sister. This would surely help him rise up the ranks of the shinobi world. Naruko got out a clipboard and timer, and handed them to Mizuki. "I hear you're the best in the class. Very responsible and very well behaved. So instead of participating in the workouts yourself, all you have to do today is record everyone's times." Naruko gave him a warm smile. "Wouldn't that be nice? Instead of working hard all day like you usually do, you get to sit back and relax instead of being covered in sweat like everyone else. You'll still be doing something, but at least it's pretty small in the grand scheme of things, right?" "Wow!" A girl with black hair ran up to Mizuki, a smile and a little blush on her face. "Mizuki, that's so cool!" Stop kissing up to him, Tsubaki." Give her a break," Iruka said. "It should be obvious by now. Tsubaki's in love with him." Everyone laughed. "Tsubaki and Mizuki, sitting in a tree, kissing," everyone chanted. Tsubaki blushed even harder. "That is not true. Iruka, you and your antics, honestly. Mizuki muttered under his breath. He was looking at the clipboard and timer given to him. To say he was disappointed would have been an understatement. He was beyond disappointed. He had wanted to show his stuff to someone who could have skyrocketed his career as a shinobi, and instead he was given the equivalent of a desk job. But then again, it's not impressive to complain about things either, is it? Then again. Excuse me, Mrs. Namikaze, not that I don't appreciate this, but if we have to each pick a partner, then who will Iruka pair up with? Naruko looked around. Sure enough, everyone seemed to have a partner except Iruka. Naruko smiled. Well then, she said, walking up to Iruka and placing a hand on one of his shoulders. Looks like we'll have to be partners then. She leaned in and whispered, Mr. Class Clown. Iruka blinked for a moment, before finally screaming. What? Alright everyone. How about we start off with track races? Naruko asked. But how is that going to be any different than how we usually do things around here? Iruka asked. And why would that require us to have a partner? Are we doing relays? Tsubaki asked. I wasn't exactly finished yet, Iruko said. She had brought a bag with her, and from that bag, she pulled out a rope. You and your partner are going to race against someone else and their partner, with your legs tied together backwards. What? Iruka cried, hardly believing what he was hearing. Why? Naruko smiled. Do you know how many times my brother tried to show off by jumping backwards, only to lose his balance and slip and fall? I don't know about you guys, but I don't think ninjas are allowed to lose their step in the middle of a mission or battle. Not only that, but during missions, you'll usually be paired with other people. Say one of your teammates is injured and you need to get away. Are you supposed to leave him there? No. You're going to have to carry him. She looked at the girls, or her, and make sure you both get to safety. This exercise will make you both rely on each other, that whenever one of you falls, the person who falls needs to make it easier on the person who is supporting him or her, and the person supporting the injured needs to do whatever he, or she, can to save both of them. You'll both learn to rely on each other to help each other succeed, and you'll all learn how to move backwards, which is good for, as I mentioned before, jumping backwards, dodging attacks, etc., etc., etc. All of the students stared at her in awe. Whoa, Tsubaki thought, impressed. That actually makes a lot of sense. Looks like she really does know her stuff to a degree, of course, Mizuki thought. But still. Mrs. Namikaze. Naruko looked at him. Yes, Mizuki? This training exercise seems really important. Wouldn't it be better if I participated in this exercise instead of writing times on a clipboard? Naruko smiled. I hear you're very responsible, Mizuki. So responsible that I expect you to do this on your own time, and since Iruka is your friend, you can always ask him to help you out with the exercise to get the full effect. Come on, Iruka cried. I've got better things to do than do exercises all day. Especially on my free time. He can do the exercises with Tsubaki instead. Tsubaki blushed at this. Naruko smiled, her eyelids half closed, looking intently at Iruka, and giggled. Well, you might want to stop while you're still ahead, Iruka. All this attention will eventually get you in a lot of trouble, you know. She walked up to Iruka and tied their legs together. She then locked her arms with his and smiled. Since you have so much energy, why don't we go first? Iruka looked at Naruko closely for the first time. She had indeed prepared for this. She was wearing regular brown pants and a short-sleeved, long white shirt with orange triangles around the collar and sleeves, and with her hair tied up in a single ponytail, she looked about ready to do any physical event at this point. I'd rather not. Naruko leaned down and said, I insist. Ha, sucks to be you, Iruka. Serves you right, man. What a loser, having to do an exercise with a teacher like that. Geez, what am I gonna do now? Iruka thought. My reputation as class clown is going down the drain with this chick. But what else am I supposed to do? It's not like I can afford another F in this class. Iruka thought frantically before finally, he had a plan, and chuckled to himself. Okay everyone. The times you get are just your starting points. Work hard, and always try to beat the best time you've got, alright? So Mizuki. I got it. Record everyone's times, even if they get second place. Mizuki cried, at the starting line, which was also the finish line. Naruko smiled. Good. Now who wants to go up against us? Tsubaki's partner, apparently a friend of hers, stepped forward confidently. Come on, Tsubaki. Let's show that mean bully what you're made of, she said, pointing at Iruka. Tsubaki hesitated, before nodding and saying, Sure, why not? The two tied their legs together, and the two pairs positioned themselves in front of the starting line, backwards of course. Mizuki took out his timer. All right. On your mark, get set, go! The two teams were off, or rather, Tsubaki and her friend were off. Naruko and Iruka, however, were already on the ground. Iruka scratched his head and said, Ah man, silly me, I'm such a klutz! Everyone watching laughed. Naruko got to her feet, but Iruka just stayed on the ground, lying on his back, pretending to be asleep. More laughs from the onlookers. As Naruko tried to pick Iruka up, he rolled to his side, and with Naruko's leg tied to Iruka's leg, it resulted in her falling off her feet again, landing flat on her back. More laughs erupted from the sidelines. Iruka! Naruko yelled, getting really annoyed. When are you going to get serious? I don't know, Iruka said with a smirk. Why can't you ever stop getting wet? What does that even dash? Just then, Iruka threw another water balloon at Naruko's face, the force being powerful enough to make Naruko fall down again. The students watching the race were laughing uncontrollably now. Iruka was laughing too. Ha ha! Ah man, you should have seen your face. Time! Mizuki cried, as Tsubaki and her friend had finally reached the finish line and they looked a little roughed up. It was obvious that they had fallen a good number of times. Mizuki checked the timer. 5 minutes and 28 seconds. Tsubaki dropped to the ground. That was a lot harder than I thought it would be. Tsubaki's friend looked just as disappointed. I've never had a time that bad. Especially with only one lap. Come on, Iruka, let's get a move on. Naruko clapped, as if to try and encourage Iruka to run through clapping. Alright, I'm going. Iruka knew that he couldn't keep them at the starting line for too long, or else she would have surely given him an F for the day. They started running backwards, and this time, every time they fell, they legitimately fell. And they fell too many times to count, too many times in fact, that it wasn't even funny anymore. Come on, Iruka! Stop messing around and let us have our turn. Iruka, that jerk. This is one exercise that I'd actually like to do for once. If this lasts any longer, then we won't even get to have our turn. Naruko looked at Iruka for a second, and noticed a slight tinge of sadness on his face, but in a split second, he yelled. Ah, shut up, you morons! You wish you could do some of the stuff I do. Why don't you shut up for once, Iruka? Per Mrs. Namikaze, one of the girls said. She paired up with Iruka of all people. Look at her shirt and pants, they're so dusty now. What a waste! It looked like a really nice outfit too. Very chic, another girl added. One of the boys gave the girl a look. What exactly does chic even mean anyway? The girl returned the look with a look or her own. Humph, obviously you wouldn't know. Finally, Naruko and Iruka crossed the finish line. They both fell to the ground, dead tired. Mizuki looked at the timer. 10 minutes and 53 seconds. The students laughed. Man, that time is downright terrible. At least we know that we'll never have a time that bad, right? Iruka! Naruko cried, standing up, and pointing a threatening finger at Iruka, who gulped, fearing what might happen next. Naruko closed her eyes, and tried to regain her composure. Get a D for at least finishing the race. Iruka pumped his fists up. Alright. My first D. Tsubaki's friend frowned. That's not exactly something to be proud of, Iruka. Naruko sighed. Whatever, let's just get these ropes off and let the others race. Everyone seemed to be okay with that. As the other pairs competed against each other, Naruko sat on a bench and rested for a moment. Kotetsu had warned her, and she had just thought that he was exaggerating. Now, she was definitely paying for it. Next time Kotetsu complains about his job, I'll take his word for it. She looked at the other students racing, and noticed that Iruka was missing from the crowd. While everyone else was focusing all their attention on the races, Naruko focused all of hers on trying to find Iruka. Finally, she spotted him all alone, behind everyone else, with a sad look on his face. Naruko raised an eyebrow. Maybe there's more to this clown than meets the eye. After the races, Naruko made the students do a couple more exercises, all in which Iruka gave her a hard time, and then went back inside to take some simple printout tests on ninjutsus and genjutsus, and somehow, Iruka found a way to give her a hard time during that too, without her taking his tests away from him. Finally, it was time to go home. Naruko bowed. Thank you for having me as your teacher. I've learned a lot, and I would have liked to stay, despite all of problems I've had today, but your official teacher should be here tomorrow, so please give him, or her, a warm welcome, okay? Yes, ma'am, the class answered unanimously. They all rushed to the door. Iruka was about to go out the door too, until Naruko grabbed him by the collar. Oh no you don't! I want to have a word with you before you go, Mr. Yumino. Oh. Iruka's in trouble! Iruka's in trouble! Some of the boys chanted in unison. When everyone except Naruko and Iruka left the classroom and Naruko closed all the doors and windows, Iruka started to get nervous. Maybe she was right, maybe I should have quit while I was still ahead, he thought. She stood in front of him and smiled. Now that you can't escape before I finish. Oh my gosh! Iruka thought. What's your favorite food? What? What's your favorite food? Was this a trick? Ichiraka ramen? Oh my gosh! Naruko gushed, her eyes lighting up. I love that place. They have the best ramen in the world. And their family is just too cute. Did you see Tuchi's daughter yet? She's to die for. She grabbed Iruka's arm and started dragging him out the door, much to Iruka's surprise. Wait, what is this? Naruko gently touched Iruka's nose and smiled. A date, she said, giggling. Iruka stared at her for a moment, before finally screaming. What? Hey there, I am. How are you? Naruko asked, as she looked over the counter to see the little girl already walking around the kitchen on her own. Naruko looked at Tuchi. She already knows how to walk around the kitchen. Tuchi nodded proudly. Yes, she a fast learner, just like her old man. He laughed. At the rate she's growing, she'll learn how to make all my ramen by next year. Naruko laughed. You're already teaching her how to cook? Tuchi, I never imagined you as a slave driver. Tuchi laughed again. When making your own business, Naruko, you have to be. He gave Naruko and Iruka their bowls. Here you go. Thank you very much. Naruko nudged Iruka a bit. Come on, she whispered. Say thank you. Thank you, sir, Iruka said. You're welcome, Tuchi said, waving his hand. He started preparing a new batch for future customers. As the two of them ate, Naruko looked at Iruka and asked, Isn't this great? Iruka nodded. So good. After a while, Naruko put her chopsticks down and looked at Iruka. Iruka, why do you do the things that you do? Iruka stopped what he was doing for a second and said, I just want to, that's all. He continued to eat his ramen. Naruko curiously tilted her head to the side. No reason whatsoever? Iruka shook his head while he was chewing. No reason, he swallowed. Whatsoever? Not even to get some attention? Iruka stopped for a moment, before asking, Why would I want attention? Naruko shrugged. I don't know, maybe because no one else pays attention to you otherwise and that you don't have any parents to give you attention at home? Iruka looked at her, eyes wide, and asked, How do you know that? Naruko fiddled with a strand of her hair. One of your substitutes, Kotetsu, told me about it. He was all Iruka's parents died fighting the nine-tailed fox, but even so, that's no excuse for the way he acts in class. I'm sorry. That sounded insensitive. Iruka nodded. Yeah, you can say that again, he muttered. Naruko put a gentle hand on one of Iruka's shoulders. I'm sorry about your parents, but if you're feeling lonely, then why don't you stay with me at my place? Iruka slapped Naruko's hand away from his shoulder. Why would I want to live in the same place the demon that killed my parents' lives? He looked down at his bowl. My parents died trying to fight that thing. Lots of people died to fight that thing. And instead of finishing it off, we act as if it never happened. It's like everyone died for no good reason. Naruko looked down at her bowl too. You're right. It doesn't seem fair, doesn't it? How the nine-tailed fox attacked our village, how people we loved died so easily, How all of our lives have changed so drastically because of what happened. Iruka looked at her, wondering where she was going with this, and unbeknownst to them at the time, Tucci was also listening in, while stirring his broth. Naruko looked at Iruka and said, "You can hate the demon all you want. The demon did this. Not Naruto. Not a baby that doesn't even know what's going on right now." Naruko looked down at her bowl again. "Not a baby boy that doesn't even realize that he doesn't have any parents, that doesn't even realize that he's all alone." Naruko looked at Iruka, with pleading eyes. "Out of everyone I know right now, I hope that you can understand that," she said softly. Iruka looked away. "Please, he's not alone. He's got you. But I'm not his mother. I may look like him, but you have to believe me, I'm not his mother." A horrible idea crept into Naruko's head, an idea that she hadn't thought of until now. One day when he's old enough to understand, I'll have to tell him that I'm not his mother, and he'll be crushed. Then he truly would feel alone. Iruka looked at her, and then looked at his bowl once more, seeing his reflection on the surface of the broth. He remembered how crushed he felt when he found out his parents died. It all happened so fast. No matter how much he told himself and others that he would be prepared for it, it blew him away. It changed his life forever. The people that knew you would pity you, and stop approaching you, thinking that you needed some space and that you would eventually get over it by yourself. They didn't know how to comfort you, and they didn't want to risk trying and only making it worse. On the other hand, the people who didn't know you only glance over you. They just looked at you and thought that you were some kid just passing through. Eventually, you'd go back home to your family, wouldn't you? No. That wasn't it at all. "So please," Naruko asked, her voice faltering a little bit, struggling to regain her composure. "I'm not asking you to like him. I'm not asking you to accept him. I'm just asking you, at the very least, to pity him. To sympathize with him." She held his hand and squeezed it firmly. "Just as I sympathize with you." Iruka thought for a moment. It felt so long to Naruko. Did she do enough to convince him? After what seemed like an eternity, Iruka nodded slowly. "Okay." Naruko smiled warmly at him. "Thank you?" Iruka blushed. Yeah? Naruko giggled, and added, "You know, my offer still stands." "What offer?" "The offer to live at my place with Naruto and me. You wouldn't feel so alone anymore." "No." Why not? Won't you feel lonely?" "Yeah." "Won't you miss getting some sort of affection when you get home, like a hug, or a kiss on the forehead, something?" "I still hug." "Who?" "Your knees." Iruka looked at her, shocked. "How did you?" Naruko realized what she had just done. "Lucky guess?" Iruka looked down at his bowl again. "All right, fine. You caught me. I hugged my knees. End of discussion. You admit that you're all alone, you admit that you're lonely, and you always constantly try to stave off your loneliness. Why are you doing this to yourself? My parents, they were such strong shinobi. They were strong and they were fearless and they could take on whatever came their way. I'm gonna be just as strong as they were. I'm gonna keep going with this chip on my shoulder, because no matter how many chips they had on their shoulders, they always pulled through, and they always succeeded." He looked at Naruko through the corner of his eye. "Please try to understand." Naruko looked down again. "I understand, but I'll say that honestly, I don't approve of this. But if that's the way you want to live your life, then I won't stop you." She looked outside for a moment. It was getting late. She patted Iruka's head. "I'm glad that we had this talk." She pulled out some money and paid Tucci for both of their ramen. "Thanks for the ramen, Tucci." She leaned over the counter and waved to Ayam. "Hope to see you again, sweetie." Just when Naruko was about to leave, Tucci said, "Naruko!" Naruko turned around. "Yes?" Tucci looked at Ayam for a moment, before looking at Naruko straight in the eye, and saying, "I sympathize for the boy too." "You do?" Tucci nodded. He looked down at Ayam again, who was playing with a ball of dough. "If Ayam were in his place, I'd want her to be taken care of too. To at least have a place other than home where she can be accepted. A place that she can call her home away from home. A sanctuary." He turned back to Naruko. "Tell the boy that he's welcome here anytime." Naruko couldn't believe her ears. Tucci laughed. If he's ever hungry, just tell him that he can have the best of the best anytime he wants. And if he can't pay, that's okay. We can just put it on his tab and he can pay for it later. We'll give the kid some slack. And besides, if he likes our ramen just as much as you do, we might just have a new favorite customer." Naruko smiled and bowed. "Thank you. Thank you very much, Tucci." She started to continue exiting the restaurant, but she stopped herself again. "Oh, and Iruka?" Iruka turned around again. "Yeah?" Naruko winked at him. "You don't need to take my advice or anything, since you're already kind of your own man and all, but I think you'd have better luck getting attention by being the best in the class, not the worst in the class. I think success stories are much more memorable than a good joke, don't you think?" Iruka shrugged. "Maybe." Naruko smiled, and she finally left Ichiraku Ramen. Despite the fact that she had left, Iruka kept on staring at the spot where she had left from. Tucci saw this and smiled. "She very kind. Isn't she?" Iruka kept looking at the spot where she had left from. "Yeah," he answered absent-mindedly. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" "Yeah." "Her hair looks pretty soft, doesn't it?" "Yeah." "You want a hug from her, don't you?" "Yeah, wait, what?" Tucci laughed hysterically. Iruka blushed furiously. "That's not funny, old man." Tucci just kept on laughing. "Now that's a joke that you'll never forget." Iruka just stared hard at his bowl of ramen. "What a rotten day," he thought to himself. "Then again, she does look like she gives good hugs. Laying your head on her chest must feel like laying your head on a pillow or something." Iruka's nose started to bleed a little, which he desperately tried to hide. Unfortunately for him, Tucci saw it. He laughed so hard that he could barely stand. "The boy's becoming a man." He laughed for a whole minute, before suddenly turning a complete 180, pointed at Iruka and said, "Don't you dare have any thoughts like that about my daughter, you hear?" This was just too much. "I'm not going to have any thoughts about your daughter. Until now, I've never even had any thoughts about any girl." Tucci grinned again. "Except for that one." He started laughing hysterically again. Iruka couldn't take it anymore. "That's it, I'm leaving." He exited the restaurant and screamed. "Forever! That's not what you said last time." "Ga! Naruto!" The boy was placed back in his aunt and godmother's arms. He was sleeping. The third Hokage smiled at her. "Did you have a good day at the academy?" Naruko nodded. "Yep." "No problems at all?" Naruko shook her head. "None at all." The Hokage didn't seem to believe her. "Really?" Naruko laughed weakly. "Well, maybe one or two." The third Hokage sighed. "We're going to have to deal with that boy eventually." "Yeah, I guess you're right about that, but can you at least go easy on him?" The third Hokage raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Why is that?" Naruko looked at Naruto and said, "I hear he hugs his knees when he's alone." "Oh, by the way, Naruko," the third Hokage said, "I think that you'd be glad to know that we've made some special arrangements for you and Naruto." Naruko looked away from the sleeping Naruto in her arms and turned her attention to the now smiling old shinobi. "Special arrangements?" she asked. The third nodded. He held his hands behind his back and looked up at the night sky. "Naruto, when he is old enough, will be allowed to attend the academy free of charge." Naruko's eyes grew wide as a big smile appeared on her face. "Seriously?" The third chuckled and nodded. "Yes, and until he's old enough, you and Naruto will be supported financially." "That's awesome," Naruko thought for a moment. "But what happens when he is old enough to attend the academy?" she asked. "You could be my assistant if you like," the third Hokage suggested. Naruko thought about it for a moment. "Your assistant, huh? The work isn't too complicated, so it'll be easy for you to adjust to it, and the pay is decent to say the least. But I must warn you that work may pile up every once in a while, and you'll admittedly have long work days, usually ranging from morning to night." Naruko looked at Naruto, a soft expression on her face. "I don't really have a choice in the matter, do I?" she said quietly. "I can't exactly find work anywhere else. And even if it's hard," she gently stroked one of Naruto's cheeks, "I've got someone at home who's relying on me to do my part." The third Hokage smiled. "I understand," he said. Naruko nodded, and the third Hokage watched her as she started her walk back home. Before she could get too far though, a sudden thought crept into the mind of the third Hokage. "Naruko," he called. Naruko stopped and turned around to face him. "Where exactly are you living now?" he asked. "You used to live in the Hokage residence with Minato, but since he died and I became Hokage, you've been formally forced to move. I'm just curious as to where you've moved to, considering your new social status in the village and your money issue." Naruko smiled reassuringly at the elderly shinobi. "Don't worry, I found a place." The third Hokage was obviously surprised. "Really?" Naruko nodded. "Yep." She looked back at Naruto and said, "It's not as big or as fancy as a mansion or anything, but I think it's definitely homey. And best of all, the rent is pretty cheap too." The third Hokage scratched his head, a bit skeptical to what he was hearing. "How did you ever get such a place?" Naruko gave him a little wink. "Let's just say I know the landlord personally." "Well, look who finally decided to show up," the landlord said, as he saw Naruko walking towards the apartment. He was a short, friendly-looking old man with gray hair neatly combed to the side. "I was half afraid that the villagers finally had the guts to, well, you know." "Sorry," Naruko said, bowing apologetically. "It's been an eventful day." The landlord smiled and gave her a nod. "I see." He yawned. "Well, I'm going to turn in," he said drowsily. "Good night." "Oh, before you go," Naruko said, "I just want to tell you again how grateful I am that you're letting Naruto and me stay here. I can't thank you enough." The landlord let out a little chuckle and said, "Still as polite as ever, aren't you? You haven't changed one bit." He looked up at Naruko's apartment door and sighed. "I've watched you and your brother grow up in this apartment building, and not just me, but everyone else who lives here." He shook his head and chuckled again. "It's amazing how much things stay the same. Not a single person has moved out of this apartment building except you and your brother when he became Hokage." He looked back at Naruko. "It wasn't just my decision to let you move back in. What can we say?" He smiled. "Having you back is very nostalgic for all of us." He sighed. "Makes me realize how old we're all getting." Naruko smiled. "If you asked me, that's not so bad." She then thought for a moment and asked, "But what about Naruto? Why are you all letting him stay?" The landlord sighed, walked to his suite, and answered, "Let's just say we trust you." Naruko smiled, and left it at that. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he drowsily said back. Naruko waited until after the landlord closed his door to start heading towards her own suite. When she entered, instead of turning on the lights, she used the moonlight coming through the windows, which were still uncovered from this morning, to guide her way to the bedroom. She carefully laid Naruto on the bed with his little head against the pillow. She watched him while he slept. "He looks so peaceful," she thought. She bent her knees to be at the same level as Naruto, rested her arms on the bed, and used one of her hands to tenderly stroke one of Naruto's cheeks. Naruto stirred. "Mama," he murmured. Naruko stopped stroking his cheek. Her eyes widened. "What did he just say?" "He said mama," a voice in her head said. Naruko quickly stood back up and stepped back, horrified. "He said mama?" "Yes," the voice answered. Naruko shook her head and covered her mouth, trying to regain her composure. "He said mama. He did," the voice reassured. "But I'm not his mother." She suddenly remembered a part of her conversation with Iruka. Iruka looked away. "Please, he's not alone. He's got you." "But I'm not his mother. I may look like him, but you have to believe me, I'm not his mother." A horrible idea crept into Naruko's head, an idea that she hadn't thought of until now. "One day when he's old enough to understand, I'll have to tell him that I'm not his mother, and he'll be crushed. Then he truly will feel alone." That same horrible idea was creeping through her mind right now. For a long time, she was lost in her thoughts. Then she said to herself, "I can't do this." Mikoto Uchiha heard a knock at the door. Her husband, Fugaku Uchiha, upon hearing the knocking on the door, entered the room, looked at her, and asked, "Is someone at the door?" Mikoto shrugged. "Apparently." Fugaku sighed and shook his head. "Who could be visiting at this hour?" Mikoto opened the door. "Oh. Hello there, Naruko." She looked at the sleeping baby boy in her arms. And I see you've brought Naruto along with you. Hi, Mikoto. She looked over Mikoto's shoulder. Fugaku, she added. Fugaku walked up to the door, standing behind his wife. Hello there, Naruko, he said. After an awkward moment of silence between the three, Mikoto asked, Is there a problem, Naruko? Why are you visiting at a time like this? Naruko diverted her eyes away from Mikoto and Fugaku's gaze. Mikoto and Fugaku looked at each other. Mikoto was obviously worried, and if Fugaku was worried, he did a good job hiding it. Both of them knew, however, that the Naruko in front of them was not the same Naruko that they knew. She seemed a bit off in a bad way. Can I talk to you two for a moment? Naruko asked. Mikoto gave her husband one last worried glance, before saying, Sure you can. Naruko and Fugaku sat at the table while Mikoto made them a quick batch of tea, Fugaku suspiciously eyeing the sleeping baby in Naruko's arms. When the tea was finally ready, Mikoto distributed the cups to everyone, Naruko taking a long sip while Mikoto and Fugaku simply held theirs and waited patiently for her to finish. After the sip, Naruko let out a long, satisfied "Ah," before thanking her hosts for the tea. You're welcome, Mikoto said. Now why don't you tell us why you're here? Fugaku suggested. Naruko looked sadly down at Naruto. She didn't say anything for a while. To Mikoto, it didn't look like she didn't have anything to say, it was just that she had a hard time saying it. Fugaku's patience was growing thin. If you have nothing to say or you can't say it, then why did you come? Mikoto tried to calm her husband down. Dear Dash. No, Naruko said softly. He's right. Avoiding eye contact the entire time, Naruko gulped, and finally said, I think that Naruto would be better off staying with all of you. Fugaku slammed his fist on the table. Absolutely not. Dear, Mikoto hissed, placing her hands on her husband's shoulders in an effort to try and calm him down. Keep your voice down. You might wake up the kids. And besides, she nodded her head towards the intimidated Naruko. You're scaring her. Fugaku pointed an accusing finger at Naruko. And she's setting us up. Mikoto looked at her husband like he had gone crazy. What? She hissed. Fugaku rubbed his temples angrily. Ever since that. He pointed at Naruto. Demon attacked the village has started accusing the Uchiha clan of orchestrating the attack. Dear, Mikoto gently, but somewhat firmly, placed her hands on his face and forced him to look directly at her. Listen to me. You need to calm down. How can I calm down? Fugaku hissed. When the village is trying to crush the very thing that I've put my heart and soul into? Fugaku pried his wife's hands off his face. For years I have tried to strengthen the bond between the village and the Uchiha clan, and what do these accusations tell me? That it was all for nothing. They still don't trust us, even after all this clan has done for them. And they probably forced Naruko to give us that baby to further prove their accusations. Honey, don't you think that maybe you're overreacting about this? Fugaku was about to answer that question, but before he did, he glanced one more time at Naruko. He took his wife aside, and, after one more glance at Naruko to make sure that she wouldn't try to eavesdrop on their conversation, whispered, The village is going to force the clan to live at one of the corners of the village. They're going to ostracize the Uchiha clan from the rest of the village. Mikoto couldn't believe her ears. What? Fugaku nodded gravely. And just to make things worse, they're going to place the clan under heavy surveillance. He shook his head again. They just don't trust us. They simply stood there silently for a minute before Mikoto took a deep breath, and said, Listen, Naruko obviously has something on her mind and you're in no condition to talk to her right now. Why don't you turn in for the night and let me handle this? You're not going to take that baby in, are you? Mikoto, think about the Uchiha clan's reputation. Fugaku was going to say more, but Mikoto stopped him before he could continue. Please let me handle it. Fugaku didn't seem too sure. Don't worry, everything will be fine. She smiled. I promise. Fugaku sighed and rubbed his temples. All right. He started to leave the room, and Mikoto could hear him mutter to himself. It's things like this that make me wonder if Madara was right all along. After Fugaku left, Mikoto took a deep breath and sat back at the table. Is everything all right? Naruko asked. For the most part, Mikoto said. She stroked one of her bangs before asking, Naruko, what did you mean when you said that Naruto would be better off staying with us? Naruko looked at Naruto sadly, before shaking her head and answering, I'm sorry, but he just can't stay with me. And why is that? Mikoto asked. She secretly prayed that the reason wasn't what she thought it was. When Naruko didn't answer, Mikoto thought she'd at least try to set her own worries at ease. Please tell me it's not because of the village. Please don't tell me that the way they're treating you differently and all the bad attention Naruto's giving you is enough for you to abandon him. Naruko shook her head. No, it's not that. Oh, thank goodness, Mikoto thought, placing her hand over her heart and letting out a sigh of relief. Then why is it? Mikoto asked. At that moment, Naruko lost it. Tears were starting to fall from her eyes and down her cheeks. She was sniffing and hiccuping uncontrollably, and all she could do was shake her head and try to clean herself up with her free hand as best she could and keep all the noise she was making to a minimum. Mikoto rushed to her side and tried to calm her down. Naruko, what's wrong? Naruko tried to talk as best she could against her own sniffs and hiccups. She shook her head. I just can't. But why? Mikoto asked. Naruko, I can't help you if I don't know what's wrong. I just can't, Naruko whispered as loudly as she could. The tears were coming down hard now. Oh, Naruko, you're crying on the baby, here, give him to me. Naruko handed Naruto to Mikoto, and did her best to clean herself up and regain her composure. Mikoto rocked Naruto in her arms, to make sure he stayed asleep. While she was doing that, Naruto stirred a bit, and murmured, Mama. Mikoto's eyes grew wide. He isn't talking about me, right? She asked, panicked. Naruko shook her head as she rubbed her eyes. No. I'm pretty sure he's talking about me. Mikoto let out a sigh of relief. Oh, thank goodness, she said aloud. Sudden realization hit her, and she smiled at Naruko and said, Naruko, he's calling out for you. I know, Naruko said. But I'm not his mother. Mikoto finally understood. She slowly nodded her head. Oh, I get it now. Naruko stopped crying. You do? Mikoto shrugged. Well, I can't say that I completely understand, but I don't think I'd take it too well if a demon child called me mom either. Naruko wailed loudly. Mikoto jumped a bit in surprise and tried to shush her. Naruko, it's too late for this, she whispered frantically. Naruko shook her head and blew her nose. I know, but that's not it. Mikoto found a stray pillow that could be used as a small bed for Naruto and placed him gently on the table. She then went to Naruko and tried to console her. Naruko, you have to tell me what's wrong. Otherwise I can't help. Naruko shook her head. I can't. Mikoto gave her a bewildered look. Why? She asked. Naruko made many crazy gestures with her hands before finally answering. I promised the Hokage that I wouldn't. Mikoto still looked confused. I don't get it. I promised him that I wouldn't tell anyone who Naruto's real parents were. Naruko quickly covered her mouth with her hands, realizing that she had let the cat partially out of the bag. Mikoto's eyes grew wide. Naruto has birth parents? When Naruko didn't answer, Mikoto gently placed a hand on Naruko's shoulder and said, I understand that you promised not to tell, but whatever you can't tell me is obviously affecting you right now. Please, Naruko, I want to help. You can trust me, can't you? Realizing that it was too late to go back at this point, and knowing that Mikoto was someone she could trust, Naruko finally said, Naruto's birth parents are Minato and Kushina. Mikoto's eyes grew wide, and she quickly looked back and forth between Naruko and Naruto repeatedly. She pointed at Naruto. He's Minato and Kushina's child? Naruko nodded. Yeah. They sacrificed themselves so that the nine-tailed fox could be sealed inside Naruto, or something. When Mikoto gave her a funny look, Naruko flung her hands up into the air and wailed. I'm not a shinobi. If you don't know, then what chance do I have? The waterworks came back on. Mikoto put two and two together. So you're... She struggled to find the right words to describe Naruko's current state. Like this because your brother and stepsister's baby called you mama? Naruko nodded. She had finally calmed down a bit. I just can't keep him. If I keep him, then I'll eventually have to tell him that I'm not his mother, and if I tell him that, he'll be crushed. Then why don't you not tell him? Mikoto suggested. But then he'll think I'm his mother. And that'll be like slapping Kushina and Minato in the face. Naruko blew her nose and added. And what if I told him but he didn't believe me? I mean, she held a couple strands of her own hair. We both have blonde hair. She pointed at her eyes. We both have blue eyes. She pinched her own cheeks. We have whisker marks on our faces. Yeah, what's up with that? I don't know. As far as I know, I was born with this. It must have been a really recessive gene or something. She then continued what she was talking about. If he believes that I'm his mother, then that'll be like spitting on Minato and Kushina's graves? Mikoto finished. Something like that, Iruka said softly. After a moment of silence, Mikoto asked. So how is leaving Naruto with us going to solve anything? Naruko shrugged. At least with you guys he'd know that he was adopted. That'd save all of us a lot of drama. But what if he sees you around the village? What then? I don't know, Naruko cried, as quietly as she could. I didn't think this all the way through. All I knew was that it would have been a bad idea to keep him with me. For a moment, no one said anything, until finally, Naruko murmured. It should have been me. Mikoto looked at Naruko. What? Naruko sniffed. I should have been the sacrifice for the seal. She rubbed her temples and shook her head. Instead of becoming a shinobi like my brother, I decided to live a normal life. He was willing to sacrifice his own safety and well-being, sacrifice his own happiness, for the sake of the entire village. And what did I want? She looked down and said bitterly. A peaceful, picture-perfect life. A husband, some kids, and me in a perfect little house, in a perfect little place all to ourselves. She shook her head angrily. What was I thinking? How could I have been so selfish? If I had been a shinobi, then I could have been there with Minato, protecting Kushina and Naruto. I could have made sure they were safe. I could have been the sacrifice for the seal instead of them. Mikoto placed her hands on Naruko's shoulders and squeezed them firmly. Stop it! Don't you dare talk like that! Naruko angrily pulled Mikoto's hands off. And why shouldn't I? She laughed as if she were a psychopath. It's not like I had anything to live for anyway. But my brother and my stepsister? They had a son, each other, and an entire village. Mikoto didn't see any other choice. She slapped Naruko across the face and once again grabbed her shoulders, again squeezing them firmly. Naruko, she said through clenched teeth. Get a grip! She violently shook her before finally letting Naruko go and giving the two of them a breather. Mikoto stroked her bang before finally asking, Are you okay now? Naruko nodded slowly. Yeah, she answered softly. Good. Now listen to me. You have plenty to live for. And now that you have a baby with you, you have even more to live for. Naruko didn't seem to agree. And what exactly did I have to live for before Naruto came into my life? Minato, Kushina. Mikoto pointed to herself. Me! And I'm sure there are plenty more, right? When Naruko didn't answer, Mikoto grabbed one of her shoulders and shook her gently and asked, Right? Naruko shrugged. I don't know Kakashi Izumo Kotetsu Iruka now too. See? Mikoto said. That's plenty to live for already. Yeah, but that still doesn't excuse my selfish lifestyle. Mikoto sighed. Naruko, wanting a normal life isn't selfish. Compared to all of yours. Yes it is. Mikoto looked down for a moment, before she said, You know what? You're right. It is selfish. And you want to know something else? She looked at Naruko, her eyes showing off her sadness. We've all wanted it on numerous occasions. Naruko's eyes grew wide. What? Mikoto let out a small laugh, looked down at the table, and drew circles on the table with her index finger. Yes. You can say that. In a way, we were jealous of you. It took a moment for Naruko to process these words. You all were jealous. She pointed at herself. Of me? She just couldn't believe it. But why? Mikoto sighed. Let's just say that being a shinobi is very far from all fun and games. Placing every dream and desire to the side in order to do your duty, always saying goodbye to your family in case the next mission you take is your last, having to emotionally keep everything bottled up to the point where it's unbearable. The physical and mental pain that goes with the job, seeing your friends die right in front of you. Mikoto shook her head and slowly rubbed her temples. You have all the power you want, but you're constantly someone's tool or have to act like one. She looked at Naruko. There were times when we were very close to quitting. Even my brother? Naruko asked. Well, your brother a little bit less than the rest of us, but yes, even he considered quitting at least once. Mikoto smiled. But then we come home from our missions and we see our families and friends, the people we're protecting, and we know it's all worthwhile. Mikoto gently held Naruko's hands in hers and gave them a soft squeeze. Minato and Kushina always told us how, even after the worst missions, you'd always be there at home, waiting for them, with a smile on your face and food prepared for them and you ready to help them out both physically, mentally, and emotionally in any way you could. You did that, Naruko. You've helped keep the fourth Hokage and his wife sane. She smiled at Naruko knowingly. Would a selfish person really devote all that time and effort to nurture the people they loved? Naruko smiled and wiped the sides of her eyes a bit. No, I guess they wouldn't. Good. Mikoto wagged her finger at her playfully. Now I don't ever want to hear you talk like that again, understand? Naruko let out a little laugh. Yeah. She looked at Naruto. But what do I do about Naruto? Mikoto sighed. Naruko, I'm sorry, but I can't take him in. I've got 2 boys in this house now, and with Itachi being the oldest, Fugaku's going to devote most of his attention to him, no doubt neglecting our newborn in the process. I don't know about you, but that'll be more than enough drama for me to deal with. Adoption drama would probably pull me over the edge. Naruko's face fell. She reached out to stroke Naruto's cheek and asked, But what can I do? If he stays with me, then I'm eventually going to have to tell him the truth. And if I tell him the truth, Naruko, Mikoto interrupted. You can't keep worrying about the future like this. She held Naruko's chin and forced her to look at her. Look, I can't say that I know what to do or what's going to happen, but I can say this. A child needs to be loved, and Naruto will definitely get the love and attention he needs from you. But whatever happens in the future will happen in the future. We live in the present, not the future, or the past for that matter. Worry about Naruto's reaction to the truth when you get there. Until then, she picked Naruto up and held him in front of Naruko. Even if it's just pretend, he needs a mother. He needs you. Naruko looked at Naruto for a long time before finally taking Naruto from Mikoto's arms and cradling him in hers. She shook her head sadly. I'm going to dread the day I'll have to tell him so much. Mikoto nodded. But until then, she waited for Naruko to finish that sentence. Naruko finally relented and smiled. I'll be his mother. Mikoto smiled. That's good. They both stood up and Mikoto led Naruko to the door. Thanks for the pep talk, Naruko said. I really needed that. No problem. Mikoto opened the door to let Naruko out, but before Naruko could leave, Mikoto stopped her and added, You know, before Kushina died, we had hoped that Naruto and Sasuke would be friends. Naruko let out a small laugh. I get the hint. Mikoto smiled. Good. She gestured towards the door. Now if you don't mind, it's getting late, and we both have children we need to take care of tomorrow. All right. Before Naruko left, however, she added, Oh, and whatever I said that made Fugaku lose his temper, can you tell him I'm sorry about that? Mikoto nodded. Don't worry, I will. But if you asked me, I don't think it was really your fault. Naruko let out a sigh of relief. Thank you. She turned to leave and added, Good night. Mikoto followed her out, stopped in front of the door, and waved. Good night to you too, she said. When Naruko finally got back home, she walked back to the bedroom, and once again placed Naruto down on the bed. She bent down and stroked his cheek, and he stirred. Mama, he murmured. Naruko froze. No, Mikoto's right. A child needs love, and until that day comes when I finally need to tell him, I'll give him all the love and attention I can possibly give him. She leaned forward and gave Naruto a soft kiss on the forehead. Don't worry, sweetie, Mama's here. What is all of this? A little girl softly and politely asked as she walked down the path alongside her caretaker and surveyed her surroundings. This was a path she and her caretaker had walked on many times before, but today, almost everything about the path had changed. No, the path itself didn't change. It was just all the things that were now on it. As the little girl and her caretaker slowly walked down the path, the little girl looked around in awe and wonder as she saw strings of colorful lanterns being tied up on the tops of poles and booths. Booths and stands being set up by people she recognized and people she didn't recognize, and colorful banners, signs and decorations being set up to accompany each booth and stand for whatever reason they were there for. She held her gaze on a colorful set of masks neatly put on display by one of the booths, as she was experiencing a strange sensation of both fear and enchantment upon seeing them, and when she and her caretaker were well away from them, she broke her gaze and finally had the courage to meekly ask, "Is it a festival?" Her caretaker smiled, looked down at her, and answered, "Yes, Lady Hinata. That is correct." As he continued to lead Hinata down the path, as Hinata continued to look up at him, Hinata's caretaker explained, "You see, Lady Hinata, today is a very special day for the village." He looked down at her again. "Today is the day that, after many years of war between our village and the Land of Lightning, we have finally reached a peace agreement with them." He refocused his attention back on the path, an optimistic smile on his face. "Today is the day when the peace treaty between our two lands will be official. Today, the head cloud ninja of the Land of Lightning will come by to our village and sign the peace treaty, and in celebration of that, our village will celebrate alongside our former enemies." "And this festival is going to be one of the ways we'll be celebrating with them?" Hinata asked. Her caretaker nodded. "Yes." He stopped, and Hinata followed suit. He pointed towards some people whom Hinata did not recognize, setting up their own booth for the festival. "Do you recognize them, Lady Hinata?" After a long attempt to try and recognize them, Hinata sheepishly lowered her head in shame and answered, "No." Her caretaker kneeled down and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Lady Hinata," he said, and when Hinata looked at his face, she saw that he had a reassuring smile on his face. "It's impossible for you to recognize them in the first place because they are citizens of the Land of Lightning." Hinata let out a little gasp. "They are?" Her caretaker let out a little laugh and nodded. "Yes, they are." He looked back at those said people. "They and many others made the journey here ahead of time in order to make this a celebration worthy of such an occasion." Hinata's eyes widened as she let out a small, surprised gasp, looked back at the Land of Lightning citizens working hard on their booth, and let out a soft, awestruck, "Wow!" Then, sad realization slowly crept into her mind, and in seconds, the look of pure awe and wonder on her face was quickly replaced by a look of sadness and disappointment. Upon noticing this, Hinata's caretaker leaned forward and asked, "Is something wrong, Lady Hinata?" The concern was evident in his voice. Hinata, upon realizing what she had just done, blushed and averted her eyes away from her caretaker's concerned and worried gaze. "And no, nothing's wrong," she answered while bashfully fiddling with her fingers. Hinata's caretaker sighed. It was obvious that she was lying. "Lady Hinata," he began. "And no, really, it's nothing," Hinata quietly insisted, but unfortunately for her, her caretaker wasn't the least bit fooled. He knew her all too well. "Come now, Lady Hinata, you can tell me," her caretaker gently reassured. "We're friends, aren't we?" Well, that was certainly true. After a moment of thinking it over, Hinata finally relented and said, "Well, it's just." She looked to her caretaker, and upon seeing how intently he was looking at her, quickly blushed and opted to look down at her fiddling fingers instead. "This festival, it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun." "Ah," Hinata's caretaker said. "I get it. You're sad because you think that you aren't going to be able to participate in the festivities. Is that it?" Hinata's blush deepened as her head lowered even further down than it already had. Her caretaker couldn't help but give a small, amused grin at the spectacle before him. How could he not? She was acting as if she had just been caught red-handed committing some kind of shameful act. Despite this, however, she slowly nodded and answered, "Why, yes." Hinata's caretaker let out a deep sigh, the smile still plastered on his face. "Now why would you think that, Lady Hinata?" Surprised by such a response, Hinata hesitated before she explained. "Well, today's my birthday, and Father made it clear that he wanted me to celebrate it at home with the rest of the clan. And then there are those other ceremonies Father mentioned that we were going to do today." Hinata's caretaker continued to smile. "Yes, that is correct, Lady Hinata, but what about what happens after all those ceremonies are over?" Before Hinata could answer, however, Somebody had suddenly swept her off her feet and ran a little bit away. Hinata's caretaker gasped. "A kidnapper!" he inwardly cried. After his initial shock and surprise due to how fast it happened, Hinata's caretaker quickly stood up, battle-ready, prepared himself for any more surprises, and was about to give chase, but when he saw who the supposed kidnapper was, he placed his hands on his side, sighed, both out of relief and exhaustion, and said in an exhausted yet amused voice, "Iruka." Naruko let out a cheerful laugh and gave Hinata's caretaker a little wave. "Hi, Ko!" Apparently, what Ko had previously assumed was a kidnapping attempt was actually Naruko sweeping Hinata off her feet, spinning her around, and embracing Hinata in a big, spinning, hello hug. After addressing Ko, Naruko refocused her attention on the little girl in her arms and cuddled her a bit. "And hello to you too!" Hinata looked up and smiled. "Mrs. Uzumaki!" Naruko stopped cuddling her for a moment to turn Hinata around, as Hinata had been swept off her feet, spun, and hugged from the back, and gently say, "Oh, come now! I've told you 1,000,000 times that you can call me Naruko." She turned her attention back to Ko, who was slowly walking towards them with folded arms and an amused, calm smile replacing the look of terror and surprise that had been on his face mere seconds before. "This is your doing, isn't it?" Ko held his hands up as if he had just been caught committing a crime. "Guilty as charged." "Ko, how could you?" she playfully reprimanded. "She is the heiress to the Hyuga clan," Ko argued. "And as the next head of the Hyuga clan, she is expected to know and practice a few formalities." He smirked and added, "And by the looks of it, she's not going to learn any of them from you." "What?" Naruko asked, a little bit taken aback and offended by his accusation. "Ko! How could you say such a thing?" "Well," Ko explained, gesturing towards the hug Naruko was giving Hinata. "For starters, one does not greet people by running up to them when they least expect it and hugging them." Naruko rolled her eyes and shook her head. "Oh, hush you." She brushed a bit of Hinata's hair with her fingers and continued. "She may be an heiress to a clan, but what you all keep forgetting is that she's still just a little girl who just recently turned 3 years old." After realizing what she just said, her eyes widened. She looked back at Hinata. "Oh, that reminds me." She gave Hinata one last hug. "Happy birthday, sweetie," she whispered. "How did you know that it was my birthday today?" Hinata asked as Naruko set her back down on the ground. Naruko kneeled down until she reached Hinata's eye level, smiled warmly, and whispered, "How could I not?" She lightly nodded towards Ko. "It's the only thing Ko's been talking about for the past week." They both glanced at a confused Ko before giggling in unison. "But all joking aside," Iruka said, "you've just reached a huge milestone in your life, Hinata." "Ah, really?" Hinata asked. "How come?" "Well, it's because being 3 years old is a very important age," Naruko explained. "Ah, really? Why is that?" Hinata asked, a bit out of curiosity, but mostly out of intimidation due to how much Naruko was building up how important being 3 years old was. "Well, 3 is the number people usually use to signal when to start something, so naturally turning 3 years old should signal a new start in one's life, right?" I don't quite understand." "Oh." Naruko thought for a moment. "Well, when I was 3, I made the resolution to become more responsible around the house." "Ah, really?" Naruko let out a weak laugh. "Well, something like that." Hinata didn't understand what that meant, but that was to be expected. What Naruko was referring to was that, when she was 3 and her older brother, Minato, was 5, despite the fact that Minato was considered, and in fact was, a ninja prodigy, in anything that wasn't ninja-related, Minato was surprisingly unreliable, so when she turned 3, Naruko took it upon herself to do the chores and handle most of the responsibilities that Minato was surprisingly incapable of doing himself. Or, at least, vowed to. She was still a bit too young to be doing any of that stuff, but when she was finally old enough, she never skipped a beat. That isn't to say that she was perfectly okay with doing most of the chores and completing most of the responsibilities at home though. She would often scold her brother for being so irresponsible outside of his ninja duties. Naruko shook her head to relieve herself of the strange memories and refocused her attention back to the conversation between her and Hinata. "But my resolution doesn't have to be your resolution," she assured. "You can make it whatever you want." And it doesn't even have to be permanent either. It just needs to be a start. A start, Hinata whispered to herself. Naruko nodded. That's right, a start. When Hinata looked to be deep in thought and didn't say anything back, Naruko brushed a bit of Hinata's hair with her fingers and added, Don't worry, sweetie. No one's asking you to make one now. She let out an apologetic smile. You don't even have to make one if you don't want to. I'm sorry if I was so self-imposing. Hinata gasped and quickly shook her head. Oh no! It's a good idea. She smiled and gave Naruko a respectful bow. Thank you, Mrs. Yuzu, and Naruko. Naruko smiled and pulled Hinata in for one last, quick hug. You're very welcome, sweetie. So, Naruko said, giving Ko a chance to come back into the conversation after she let Hinata go. What are you two doing on a day like this? Well, Ko began, gesturing towards Hinata. I was taking Hinata out for an early morning stroll so she could get a first look at all the festivities. Then, after we celebrate her birthday and perform all the other clan rituals scheduled for today, I thought I'd take her to the one she really wanted to go to before the day is over. Hinata's eyes lit up as she heard this. Really? She asked. You really meant to do that? Ko smiled down at her. Of course. He gestured towards Naruko, who was now standing up. As Mrs. Yuzu Naruko good-naturedly nudged him with her elbow. Naruko said, although you are indeed next in line to be head of the Hyuga clan, you are still just a child. Your happiness means a lot to me, Lady Hinata, and I am not so old as to have forgotten how tedious and grating the rituals of the Hyuga clan can be to young ones like yourself. Once our responsibilities are over with, we can run out here and you can have as much last-minute fun as you can possibly handle. Hinata could hardly believe her ears. Thank you so much, Ko! She cried, bowing her thanks towards her caretaker. Ko couldn't help but laugh. Oh, come on! I don't get a hug? You said it yourself, Ko, Naruko said, a smug grin on her face. Hugging people isn't a formality. I said it wasn't a formality in terms of greeting people, Ko argued, but once he saw the look on Naruko's face, he knew that he'd just been played and blushed accordingly. After Naruko and Hinata both laughed at how silly he was acting, he sighed, he desperately wanting to change the subject. So, Naruko, he began. May I ask why you are so dressed up today? Oh. Naruko looked down and smoothed out her kimono. You mean this old thing? She was wearing a pink, ceremonial kimono with light blue cherry blossom designs and a light blue sash, and her hair was tied up in a ceremonial bun with 2 chopsticks. She gave Ko and Hinata a confident, fun, little twirl, a twirl that admittedly took Hinata's breath away. She had always considered Naruko beautiful, but her little fashion twirl seemed to serve as a testament to the fact that Naruko wasn't just considered beautiful because she was pretty, she was beautiful for many other reasons too. For starters, there was that confident smile, laugh and energy she had that seemed to just further empower the physical beauty she already had. But unbeknownst to Naruko and Ko, Hinata noticed that on Naruko's whiskered face, which, for some reason, never seemed to hinder Naruko's beauty to her, was a light blush, a small sign of embarrassment. She was a little embarrassed doing a little fashion twirl in public, but Naruko didn't care. Fashion twirls were fun, and despite the slight embarrassment she was feeling, Naruko chose to ignore all that and just do it. Naruko was kind, sweet, beautiful, confident, and independent, all traits which Hinata greatly admired. Naruko possessed the traits that both her mother and father possessed, for the most part anyway, and deep down, she felt as if she was nowhere close to any one of them. I wish I could be more like that, Hinata thought to herself. Meanwhile, in the physical world outside of Hinata's mind, Naruko explained to Ko. The third Hokage requested that I come over and attend the signing of the treaty. Why's that? Hinata asked. Naruko and Ko looked at Hinata before giving each other nervous glances. It was obvious that Naruko was asked to appear at the signing because she was the late 4th Hokage's sister, and having her there was just like having former presidents appear at special presidential events. Despite the fact that they no longer possessed any form of real power, authority, say, or significance, for morale. But how were they supposed to explain that to Hinata? Simple, they couldn't. The third Hokage had been true to his word and had succeeded in passing laws that would keep Naruto and Naruko safe and keep the villagers from depriving them of their basic human rights and necessities, but at the same time, Many other laws had been passed alongside these. One of them had been to change Naruko and Naruto's last names to Uzumaki, for Naruto's protection and to further create the illusion that Naruko was his mother, while another forbade any mention of Naruto's connection with the nine-tailed fox in hope that the children, at the very least, would not resent him as the adults did. However, the two laws combined created an initially unprecedented consequence. The two laws combined unintentionally created a third law, a law that forbade the mention of anything regarding Naruko's past to anyone, especially around Naruto. This was because if they wanted to create the illusion that Naruko was his mother, while also not revealing to anybody the fact that Naruto, the demon child, was the fourth Hokage's son, and forbid even the mentioning of even the smallest connections between Naruto and the nine-tailed fox, whom Naruko's brother sealed inside of Naruto. Then the best way to do it was to never mention Naruko's past at all and pretend that the events in Naruko's life prior to the nine-tailed fox's attack on the village never happened, and give Naruko a fake, new past in the process. Fortunately, Naruko quickly and easily cooperated with all the effects these laws had on her life, but she did put up a fight when it came to which past the council was going to assign her. Despite the council's protests, she didn't want to be assigned a past completely opposite to her real one, because, well, how else are you going to explain Naruto having no father and give him a reason to attend the ninja academy? In the end, they finally agreed to give Naruko the past of being the wife of a proud ninja who died fighting the nine-tailed fox before the fourth Hokage finally defeated it. The council had gone through great lengths and pains to make every adult in the village memorize her new past, or at the very least, the adults who knew her, and get used to referring to it whenever they referred to Naruko's past. Naruko was even forced to wear a ring on her finger, which admittedly upset her. She had always wanted to make a family of her own, but with her already having some sort of connection with what many people considered the nine-tailed fox itself, the fake past and the ring on her finger definitely didn't help matters. With Naruto, it was practically impossible to get a boyfriend, and with the fake past, the ring as proof of that past, and the bad way the villagers always treated him, Naruto might not even want what he would consider a new dad to begin with. Well, Naruko began, just now thinking of a, hopefully, believable excuse for her presence at the signing. A signing could get pretty boring. Naruko gave Hinata a little wink. Someone's got to go in there and liven up the place, right? Hinata pondered over Naruko's words for a moment, while Ko and Naruko anxiously waited for the desired response. Much to their relief, Hinata, for the most part, seemed to believe it. I guess, Hinata said. Ko and Naruko inwardly let out sighs of relief. Naruko even tried to cover up her nervousness with a small laugh. Yeah, she said. I was surprised when the third Hokage asked me to come too, but how could I say no, right? Hinata smiled. Yes, if put in Naruko's situation, even she might have not been able to say no to the kind old man. He was practically everybody's grandfather. Right. After smiling down at Hinata, relieved that she had believed Naruko's excuse, Ko looked around and noticed something strange. Naruko? Naruko looked at Ko. Yeah? Where's Naruto? Ko asked as he continued to survey the area. Oh, Naruko said, her face falling. Hinata almost couldn't believe her eyes. A sad Naruko? She had never seen that before, nor did she ever think that that was even remotely possible. He's either sleeping at home or wandering around the village. Ko stopped searching and looked at Naruko, one of his eyebrows raised in disbelief. You left him unattended? He isn't coming with you? Hinata asked. Naruko looked down at her and gave her a sad, little smile. No, he isn't. But why? Naruko tried to let out a carefree laugh, but even she had to admit that it sounded more like an awkward, weak one. Well, for starters, it's a formal occasion. Can't have kids around, you know? And besides, she averted her eyes to the side, avoiding eye contact with the little heiress. The council told me specifically not to bring him. Hinata gasped. But why? She knew that a lot of people didn't like Naruto, but forcing Naruko to leave him behind? That seemed so crazy to her, especially when Naruto was about the same age she was and she still needed a caretaker to supervise her and take her around. Hinata, Ko said firmly, folding his arms. You needn't concern yourself with such things. Biba dash. Whatever the council says goes. There's nothing we can do about it. Hinata seemed to resign after this statement. Alright. Just then, an idea popped into her head. What if Naruto stayed with us while Naruko is at the signing? Ko was taken by surprise at this idea. What? Quickly realizing the flaws of her idea, Hinata blushed, averted her eyes to the side to avoid eye contact with her caretaker, fiddled with her fingers, and explained. He doesn't have to sit next to us during the ceremonies or anything, but he could be somewhere close to home, so if he needs any help, he could just come in and ask for some. Naruko looked at the little girl in awe for a moment before looking at Ko and saying, Sounds like a plan. Ko turned to Naruko. No, absolutely not, Ko said, immediately shooting down the thought. He turned back to Hinata. Lady Hinata, we can't perform the rituals properly if someone is constantly barging in and interrupting them. Upon seeing Hinata's disappointed face, Ko added, in a softer tone of voice. It was a very thoughtful idea, Lady Hinata, but it's just not possible. After getting no immediate response from her, Ko tenderly asked, Do you understand? Realizing that there was no way to convince him otherwise, Hinata slowly nodded and softly answered, I understand. While Hinata may have given up, Naruko was inspired by her idea, and wasn't about to give up just yet, not without a fight. Ko, Naruko said, gently grabbing Ko's arm. Can I speak with you for a minute? They both looked at Hinata. Privately? She added. Ko hesitated for a moment, before finally obliging to Naruko's request, but not before insisting that he take Hinata somewhere where she could play and still be in their sights while they discussed whatever matter Naruko wanted to discuss. After they found a playground with benches they could sit and talk on while Hinata played in front of them, Ko, never once taking his eyes off of Hinata, asked, So, what is it that you want to talk about? Before she said anything, Naruko decided to keep her eyes on Hinata while talking too. It's about Naruto, she finally said. Ko sighed. Naruko, my decision is final. Please! Naruko quickly took her eyes off of Hinata, turned to look at Ko, and leaned toward him. I'm begging you, please reconsider, she pleaded. Ko glanced at Naruko from the corner of his eyes and saw just how badly she wanted him to do just that. He saw it in the desperation in her eyes, the look of desperation on her face, and the desperate way she was leaning towards him. For a moment there, Ko was actually starting to reconsidering, but he quickly snapped out of it and shook his head for good measure. I'm sorry, Naruko, but I can't. Naruko's features softened a little bit. He really did sound sorry. She readjusted herself to the normal sitting position and the two watched Hinata playing by herself for a moment before Naruko softly asked, Is it because you believe what the villagers say? That Naruto is the nine-tailed fox? Ko shook his head, but whether Naruko saw him do it or not he wasn't sure. He was watching Hinata the entire time. Whether Naruto really is the nine-tailed fox or not doesn't matter, Ko explained. What matters is that, no matter what I believe, Naruto has the inescapable reputation of being connected to that demon, and a person like that cannot be associated with Lady Hinata, as it could tarnish her reputation. He dared himself to look at Naruko, who was still watching Hinata with a sad look on her face. Do you understand? Naruko slowly nodded. Yes, I understand. After a long moment of silence, Ko asked, Isn't there anyone else you could get to supervise Naruto? Naruko shook her head. Every ninja I know is either on duty or going to be busy celebrating to save face for the treaty, and it's not like any of the villagers would be willing to watch over him for me. The only villagers who would even consider it would be Tucci, my landlord, and my neighbors, but Tucci's going to be too busy running Ichiraka Ramen to take care of Naruto, and besides, apparently Naruto's bad for business. Why? Apparently no one wants to eat there whenever Naruto's around. Oh, and your landlord? Naruko blushed and looked away. Naruto got really excited once and didn't look where he was going. He bumped into our landlord and accidentally pushed him down the stairs. Ko's eyes grew wide with surprise and shock. Really? Naruko nodded. He's alive, but he's in the hospital right now and his wife's been really mad at Naruto ever since. She shook her head. I doubt asking her to take care of him while I'm gone is a good idea. And your neighbors? Naruko gave him a small, reassuring smile. They already made plans to celebrate in the festivities with their families. She looked back at Hinata and added, They're all so nice, But they're old enough to have children and grandkids, and all those children and grandkids hate Naruto dash. Which is why you can't have one of your neighbors watch over him. Ko finished. Because even if they're okay with it, the rest of their families won't be. Naruko nodded. Pretty much. Ko tried one more time to think of some sort of solution to Naruko's babysitting problem. Is there really no one else you can ask to take care of Naruto for you? Naruko's face fell a little. Well, I would have asked Mikoto, but... Her voice seemed to drift off after that. Ko nodded sympathetically. I understand, he said. So much had changed in the last 3 years. It turns out Fugaku had been right all along about the village having their suspicions about the Uchiha clan, because mere days after Naruko and Mikoto had their little talk, new decrees were made to do exactly what Fugaku had feared, to banish the entire Uchiha clan to a corner of the village. To forbid anyone from the Uchiha clan from leaving outside that designated area without special permission, and to forbid anyone else from entering the area without authorization. Due to Naruko's new past, Naruko no longer had the social standing to get the authorization required to visit Mikoto and her family, so on the day Mikoto's family was about to leave, Naruko made sure to see her one last time, to somewhat fulfill a promise she and Kushina had made to each other. Mikoto! Naruko cried, running towards Mikoto as fast as she could while carrying Naruto in her arms. Mikoto and a 5-year-old Itachi turned around and Mikoto gave Naruko a small, amused smile when Naruko finally reached them, tired and out of breath. Well, hello there, Naruko. She looked at what Naruko had in her arms. And it looks like you brought Naruto with you too. Well, of course, Naruko replied after taking a few moments to catch her breath. We need Naruto and Sasuke to see each other at least once before they're going to be separated from each other. I mean, what are the chances that they're going to become friends on their own, right? Gotta give them at least some kind of starting point, right? Mikoto gasped, but then smiled and said, Yes, of course. She woke Sasuke from his nap in her arms. Come on, Sasuke, she pleaded softly. Come on, come on. Sasuke slowly started to stir and open his eyes. There we go. Meanwhile, Naruko was trying to calm Naruto down. Naruto had mistook Naruko's running for a fun little ride. All the running she did had Naruto constantly bobbing around in her arms, and apparently he didn't want the fun to end, so he kept pestering her in any way he could to get her to keep going. At this point, he was pulling on her hair. No, Naruto, Naruko muttered, struggling to pry his hands off of her hair. Stop that, ouch. We've been through this before. You can't pull on people's hair like this, especially to your own mother, ow. Mikoto couldn't help but chuckle. Having a little bit of trouble there, Naruko? Naruko rolled her eyes. Oh ha, very funny. She finally managed to release her hair from Naruto's grip. She sighed. There we go. She raised Naruto up so that she could whisper to him in his ear and pointed at Sasuke. Naruto, do you see him? Naruto looked over to where his mother was pointing, looking at Sasuke with big blue eyes. Do you know who that is, Naruto? Do you? A pause. His name is Sasuke. Can you say that? Sasuke. Apparently Naruto couldn't say that because all he did was stare at the other boy in his mother's arms. Likewise, Mikoto looked down at Sasuke, who was looking right back at her, and whispered, while pointing at Naruto. Do you see him, Sasuke? Do you? Sasuke looked to whom his mother was pointing at. That boy's name is Naruto. Don't you want to be his friend? Sasuke gave her no response, simply staring at the blonde boy with his own big, onyx eyes. Naruko and Mikoto looked at each other, Naruko having a nervous look on her face. This isn't working, she sadly commented. Why don't we bring them closer together? Mikoto suggested, not ready to give up just yet. The two mothers did just that, bringing Naruto and Sasuke closer together, a baby's arm's length away from each other. They continued to stare at each other and 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 stare at each other until Naruto suddenly sneezed in Sasuke's face, and in retaliation for that sneeze, Sasuke quickly wiped his face and hit Naruto as hard as he could, which, fortunately, wasn't too hard, even for a baby. After this, it quickly escalated into a baby punching and kicking war, neither one really much hurting the other, but still. After giving each other surprised looks, Mikoto and Naruko quickly pulled them away from each other. Naruto! Naruko scolded. That wasn't very nice. The same goes for you, Sasuke, Mikoto calmly lectured. That sneeze was an accident. There was no need for that. The two didn't seem to be listening though, as, strangely enough, the two seemed to be glaring at each other. Ah geez, Iruka said. This wasn't supposed to happen. Mikoto thought for a moment, but then smiled. Well, it wasn't what we expected to happen, nor was it the outcome we desired, but… She turned to Naruko. I think we still succeeded in accomplishing what we wanted to accomplish. Naruko's eyes widened. Ah, really? Mikoto nodded. Yes. She then looked up at the sky, reminiscing about the past. Remember back when Minato and Fugaki used to be rivals? And when Kushina didn't like Minato at all when they first met? Naruko nodded. Yeah. Well, look what happened to them, Mikoto reasoned. Minato and Kushina ended up getting married. She leaned in and whispered. And having a child of their own. She leaned back. And Minato and Fugaku became good friends, and when Minato became Hokage, he and Fugaku worked that much harder to strengthen the bonds between the village and the Uchiha clan. Mikoto smiled at the memories. They may have had a rough start, but in the end, they formed the strongest bonds. Naruko gave her an amused look. So what? You're saying that people who start off hating each other eventually make the best of friends? Mikoto good-naturedly shrugged. Well, when you say it like that. The two laughed a bit, almost completely forgetting about the 5-year-old Uchiha silently watching the entire thing. All joking aside though, Iruka said. I think I understand what you're saying. She smiled and held Naruto up. Let's hope the same happens to these little guys. Mikoto nodded. Right. Mikoto! Mikoto turned around to see her husband waving at her. Mikoto! He cried, looking noticeably bitter and angry. Come on! We have to go! We're coming! Mikoto cried back. She turned to Naruko, her eyes noticeably watering up a bit, obviously holding back tears, which was completely understandable. She had just lost her best friend and her husband, who had also been a good friend of hers, and now she was going to be separated from the rest of her friends that were still alive. This may be the last time we ever see each other, she said. Naruko shook her head, her eyes watering up just as quickly. Don't say that. Who knows? Maybe the village will see that they were wrong about your clan and trust you again. Mikoto shrugged. Maybe. They hugged, or at least hugged as best as two women carrying infants could. Goodbye, Naruko. Naruko did her best to put up a bright smile. Don't you mean until the next time? Mikoto smiled. Right. Until the next time. She turned to join her husband. Say goodbye to Naruko and Naruto Itachi. Itachi gave Naruko a little bow. Goodbye, he said obediently. He was about to follow his mother, but stopped when he felt a warm hand on his shoulder. He turned around to see that the hand belonged to Naruko, who used it to pull Itachi into one last hug. Stay strong, Itachi, Naruko whispered. Your family needs you now more than ever. I know. And take care of Sasuke for me, okay? I wouldn't want anything to happen to my son's future best friend, you know? Itachi nodded. Yeah, I know. Besides, Itachi smiled up at her. I don't want anything bad to happen to my little brother either. Naruko ruffled up his hair a bit, and finally let him go. I wouldn't expect any less from you. She paused, before adding, Stay good, alright? She gave Fugaku a worried glance. Your father didn't take it too well when he heard about the whole split. I know, Itachi reassured her, adding a smile for good measure. A ninja's duty is to the whole village, not just their clan. Naruko smiled. Thank you. She looked to see that Fugaku and Mikoto were watching them. Now go, your family's waiting for you. Itachi nodded and ran towards his family. They looked back at her and gave her one last wave of goodbye before finally leaving her life forever. Well, Ko said, standing up. We'd better get going now. As you know, Lady Hinata and I have things to do. Naruko nodded. I understand. Naruko watched as Ko went to go fetch Hinata. Say goodbye, Lady Hinata, Ko gently instructed. Hinata gave Naruko a little farewell bow. Goodbye, Mrs. Naruko. Naruko smiled. Goodbye, Hinata. She leaned forward and whispered. And don't worry too much about Naruto. I'm sure nothing bad will happen to him. He knows his way around the village, for the most part, and if he gets into trouble, I'm sure someone will notice. She winked. He's pretty hard to miss. Hinata let out a relieved sigh. Oh, okay. Come on, Lady Hinata, Ko said. We need to start moving. We're cutting it close as it is. Hinata looked up at Ko. Right. Ko took Hinata's hand into his and looked at Naruko one last time. Well, we're off. Have fun, Iruka said. As they parted ways, Hinata remembered something Naruko had said to her and a word that Ko had just said mere seconds ago. Start, she whispered to herself. Ko asked, looking down at Hinata. Apparently he had heard Hinata's little slip of the tongue. Hinata looked up at Ko, averting her eyes away from his gaze and blushing a bit. I was just thinking about what Naruko said about starts. Ko smiled. Oh? Hinata nodded. Why yeah, and I think I know what I want to start on. Oh? And what's that? I want to start becoming a better person. Really? And what type of person do you want to become? Hinata looked forward, a thoughtful expression on her face. I want to become strong like father and kind like mother. Ko smiled. That's a great goal to start striving towards, Hinata. Before arriving at the rooftop of the Ninja Academy, the place the signing ceremony was going to take place, Naruko made sure to take off her ring and put it somewhere that was hopefully safe. This was because the Land of Lightning already had information on her, and it regarded her real past, the past where she was the fourth Hokage's little sister, not the one where she was a widow and a single mother. The ring alone would have brought up too many unwanted questions, and if the Land of Lightning ever found out about Naruto, who knows what would happen? Sure, the Land of Lightning was about to sign a peace treaty and all, but the third Hokage had warned her that only time would tell if the peace treaty would be a success or not, and until it can be, without a shadow of a doubt, be considered a success, there would just have to be some secrets that would have to be kept, as any clues, suspicions, or inconsistencies that could possibly betray them could prove dangerous in the long run. Wearing a kimono, she had no pockets on her, so she had to resort to putting her ring in one of her sleeves and slyly sliding it close to her elbow. Great, she thought, inwardly groaning. Now I have to make sure my arms stay bent a certain angle the entire ceremony. Thankfully for her, the signing went off without a hitch. Many people were there at the rooftop, including the village's council members, some ninja from both villages, and some important civilians from each village, and many of the villagers and ninjas from both villages were watching from the ground, prepared to start celebrating once the treaty was officially signed and the ceremony was officially over. To everyone's relief, both sides shook hands without any sign of animosity towards the other, and the signing went by much quicker than expected. Maybe because everyone had been expecting the entire event to have a much tenser atmosphere than it actually did. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow Okidoki33 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.